The Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any point, and all members will have 5 days to submit statements, extraneous material, and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. To insert something into the record, please have your staff email the previously circulated address or contact full committee staff. As a reminder to members, staff, and others physically present in this room, per guidance from the Office of Attending Physician, masks must be worn at all times during today's proceedings, except when a member is speaking in a microphone. Please also sanitize your seating area. The Chair views these measures as a safety issue and therefore an important matter of order and decorum for this proceeding. For members participating remotely, please keep your video function on at all times, even when you are not recognized by the Chair. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves, and please remember to mute yourself after you finish speaking. Consistent with House Resolution 965 and the accompanying regulations, staff will only mute members and witnesses as appropriate when they are not under recognition to eliminate background noise. I see that we have a quorum, and I now recognize myself for opening remarks. Mr. Barsa, welcome. I'm glad that you are here and that you realize it's important to appear before Congress and answer questions. We have had some difficulty getting administration people to appear before Congress, so your being here is really appreciated. Somebody said it was like spotting a unicorn. Pursuant to notice, the committee is convened today to hear testimony on the Trump administration's foreign assistance budget request for the year 2021 fiscal year. Your predecessor, Administrator Green, and I didn't agree on everything, but he did a good and serious job, and I know that he did value the importance of foreign assistance as a tool of American foreign policy. I really think he was terrific. But whatever Mr. Green personally felt, it certainly didn't align with the administration's views, which we've seen again and again in the budgets the administration has sent up to Congress. A budget request is a lot more than members on a page. It's a statement of values and priorities, and the administration's values and priorities say that we should cut our international affairs budget by roughly a quarter, that we should cut funding for global health, that we should cut food aid, that we should cut democracy assistance. Frankly, it's almost what we've come to expect. And after 3.5 exhausting years, we've all heard the administration's message loud and clear. And the message seems to be, we don't care. We don't care about the good that our development efforts do all around the world. We don't care about the people and communities that benefit from this work. We don't care about the harm done to American leadership when we pull back from the global stage. We don't care about the people who work at USAID, and we don't care about Congress, which has resoundingly rejected every budget that the White House has sent up, and which we will again. We get it. This starts at the top, and we all understand the president. One of the reasons I think foreign assistance is so important is that it's a reflection of our country's compassion and generosity, the character of America that's at the heart of our foreign policy when we're at our best. Apparently, the president doesn't think that way. He doesn't look back on things like Lend-Lease, the Marshall Plan, the Berlin Airlift, or PEPFAR as the hallmarks of strong global leadership. This is a president who praised the Chinese government's tactics after Tiananmen, who writes off most of a continent using a term that I won't repeat here. Praising the Chinese government's tactics after Tiananmen. It's really, really off base. So unfortunately, we know what to expect. We know to expect a 50% cut to family planning because the administration's crusade against women's health says it's better for women and girls to die rather than to have access to reproductive services. We know to expect reduced assistance to Central America because the administration has an anti-immigrant agenda that says we should scapegoat desperate people rather than get at the root causes of migration. But what's especially galling about this year's budget that was sent to us is that even in the middle of a global pandemic, one that has come at the cost of nearly 150,000 American lives, the administration wants to still slash funding for global health efforts. The slight increase requested for global health security is good, but it's overshadowed by massive proposed cuts elsewhere. Taken with the administration's withdrawal from the World Health Organization, which, despite its flaws, I believe is the international body best equipped to coordinate a global response to COVID-19, it's almost as though we're waving the white flag. So, Mr. Barsa, I'm afraid you're a nice guy, but you're going to run into a little bit of skepticism today as you try to make the case for this evisceration of our foreign assistance budget. I think we're also going to need answers from you about a number of troubling management decisions that you've apparently made since taking over for Administrator Green. So I'll soon recognize you for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement, pending which I'll yield to our ranking member, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, for any opening remarks he has.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this an important hearing. Acting Administrator, I should say, Barsa, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here. I want to start out by thanking you and your team and your partners in the field, especially amidst this global pandemic. The tireless work of the men and women of USAID to save lives around the world is critical. The United States continues to be the global leader in foreign assistance spending, supporting economic growth and providing food, shelter, and health resources for the most vulnerable populations. This vital work continues as the world grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic. So far, the United States has provided $1.5 billion to over 120 countries to control the spread of this deadly disease. This commitment builds on over 2 decades of U.S. investments of $140 billion in responding to infectious disease outbreaks and strengthening health systems. President's FY21 USAID request appropriately prioritizes funding to key policy priorities. This includes implementation of the administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, resources to counter malign activity and disinformation campaigns of China, Russia, and Iran, support for our allies and our partners in the Middle East, support for interim President Guaido and democracy in Venezuela, as well as countries supporting Venezuelan refugees. Prioritizes funding for the United States International Development Finance Corporation, which provides a critical alternative to China's predatory lending to developing countries. And it also advances WGDP initiative to promote women's empowerment and economic opportunity, which I strongly support. Unfortunately, the request also cuts key global health and humanitarian assistance resources. Globally, almost 80 million people are currently displaced around the world. That number is expected to rise because of COVID. The World Food Program is estimating that 270 million people will need urgent food assistance due to COVID-19, and 82% increase from last year. And COVID-19 is already erasing hard-fought gains to reduce extreme poverty and combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other infectious diseases. As expected, authoritarian regimes and terrorist organizations are looking to exploit this chaos for strategic gain, such as in areas like the Sahel. So as the disease spreads in the Middle East, Latin America, and across Africa, existing economic hardships, political challenges, and humanitarian emergencies will worsen. In other words, it is now not the time to cut this key aid. I'm deeply concerned the impacts of COVID-19 will push more fragile states into conflict. Our assistance must prioritize prevention and further destabilization, in addition to the long-term impacts, including on education, systems, food security, and vaccine distribution. This global pandemic continues to spread, and the work that we do overseas makes us safer here at home. And as I've said before, successful diplomacy and development is cost-effective. Fully funding our foreign assistance programs will ultimately save taxpayer dollars. With today's growing fiscal challenges, we must double our efforts to ensure that every dollar spent is strategic in advancing U.S. interest. So I look forward to hearing from how our assistance will be used to push back on China's malign influence and mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 and ensure continued U.S. leadership around the world. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank my friend. I agree with his testimony, and I think it's very important, the points that were made by both the chairman and the ranking member. So, a witness this morning, Mr. Barsa, John Barsa, the Acting Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development. Mr. Barsa, we're happy to have you here, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Engel, Ranking Member McCall, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. It is an honor and privilege to testify in front of the committee, and I look forward to your questions. I'd also like to thank you for your bipartisan support, which has allowed the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, to mount a robust response to the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic that has touched nearly every person around the world, both at home and overseas. The United States must continue an aggressive, comprehensive response that spans health, humanitarian assistance, and addresses the ongoing second-order effects such as food security, economic growth, and preventing democratic backsliding. I'm committed to doing so, utilizing all available resources, whether current year or future supplemental, and not let any opportunities arise for our adversaries to fill the vacuum in a turbulent world. Every day, USAID's highly professional and dedicated staff work to deliver development solutions and build self-reliance in partner countries, project American values globally, and advance our foreign policy and national security objectives. The President's budget request for FY 2021 for accounts that USAID fully and partially manages is approximately $19.6 billion, including $2.1 billion for USAID global health programs and $5.9 billion for the Economic Support and Development, or ESDF, fund. USAID will use these resources to advance U.S. foreign policy objectives by fostering stability in partner countries, promoting free, fair, and equitable societies, and expanding opportunities for American businesses. Our investments will also strengthen our national security by addressing the drivers of violent extremism and combating the spread of infectious diseases, each of which represents a potential threat to the homeland. Faced with COVID-19, America is demonstrating clear and decisive leadership. The United States has mobilized to combat the virus, both at home and abroad, by committing more than $12 billion for the response to this pandemic. USAID has acted decisively since COVID-19 cases first began to arise internationally, working with the U.S. Departments of Defense, Health and Human Services, and State as part of an all-of-America response. With $2.4 billion in emergency supplemental funding generously appropriated by Congress, including nearly $1.6 billion for foreign assistance implemented by USAID and the State Department, we are providing health care, humanitarian assistance, and economic security and stabilization efforts worldwide. This funding is saving lives by improving public health education, training healthcare workers, strengthening laboratory systems, supporting disease surveillance, and boosting rapid response capacity in more than 120 countries around the world. We are providing assistance to support communities and equip them with the tools needed to mitigate the impact of the virus. The U.S. response to COVID-19 builds upon decades of American investments in global health. In the 21st century alone, the United States has contributed more than $140 billion in global health assistance. Over the past 20 years, USAID's funding has helped Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, vaccinate more than 760 million children, which has prevented 13 million deaths. Last month, the United States committed $1.16 billion to Gavi over the next 4 years, with the goal to immunize 300 million additional children by 2025. The U.S. President's Malaria Initiative, PMI, has helped save more than 7 million lives and prevent more than 1 billion malaria cases worldwide since 2000. America has invested more than $85 billion to fight HIV/AIDS through PEPFAR, the largest commitment by any nation to address a single disease in history. PEPFAR has saved millions of lives in Africa. USAID continues to invest in global health security to address existing and emerging zoonotic diseases, which account for more than 70% of new infectious disease outbreaks. We invested $1.1 billion in this critical area since 2009. Even as last month we declared an end to the 10th Ebola outbreak that has affected the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo since August 2018, we are now scaling up a response to fight the confirmed 11th outbreak in northwestern DRC. These investments in global health throughout the decades have enabled partner countries to strengthen health systems and democratic institutions, enabling them to better respond to global health crises. We are in unprecedented times with a rapidly evolving situation on the ground in almost every country. We are working aggressively to obligate all of our resources for COVID-19 as swiftly and effectively as possible. At the same time, we want to ensure that we are accountable for the effective use of funds for COVID-19 and are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. As we consider how to prevent the next health crisis, we have to address the root causes of these outbreaks. I remain focused on USAID's efforts on helping partner countries on their journeys to self-reliance and will continue to build on the vision that each one of our programs should be look forward to the day when it can end. Our investments in global health throughout the decades are a cornerstone of this approach. We have learned that outbreaks and epidemics are often exacerbated by failures of governance and transparency. And when we do not address poor governance and conflict, we wipe out investments in health, education, and other basic social services. We also recognize that health emergencies have consequences that can rapidly require broader development assistance, whether support for orphan children, protection against sexual exploitation and abuse, livelihoods, and addressing the deeper root causes of instability in governance. While a hallmark of our journey to self-reliance effort is using analytics to measure progress, we must also measure regression to see how we may need to adjust our programs. Looking long-term, we remain committed to helping communities in our partner countries through this pandemic and its second and third order effects. The COVID-19 pandemic is not simply a health crisis, and our response cannot be just a health response. We must use the totality of development tools at our disposal as well. To focus on how to best operate in the COVID-altered world, I established a temporary agency planning cell, an executive steering committee called Over the Horizon, to guide the effort. While the USAID COVID-19 Task Force manages near-term challenges arising from the pandemic, the Over Horizon team will perform research, conduct outreach, and prepare analyses around key strategic questions to help USAID prepare for lasting challenges to the developmental and humanitarian landscape in the medium to long term. It will then provide this information to the Executive Steering Committee, composed of senior leaders from across the agency who will craft recommendations for my consideration. We are already planning for the medium and long-term impacts of COVID-19, and because I am committed to make sure that USAID will remain a trusted partner, the preferred partner in countries across the world. Again, I thank you for this opportunity to testify before you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Let me say this. Over the past several years, this administration has attempted several rescissions and other methods of slowing down or stopping foreign assistance spending. As a result, we've seen funding obligated in fits and starts with the scramble at the end of the fiscal year. We saw this again with the slow disbursement of the COVID supplemental funding, hampered by policy indecision and extra layers of bureaucracy. The Foreign Affairs Committee has strongly objected to these tactics in the past and fully expects the resources provided by Congress to be fully utilized in the manner for which they were provided. So, Mr. Barsa, let me ask you this. How much of USAID's expiring funds have been obligated to date?
Congressman, I don't have the exact figure in terms of the number of funds to date, but I know we're making good progress, and we certainly expect to have all of our expiring funds obligated by the end of the fiscal year.
Well, let me say this then. Do you commit to obligating all expiring funding as well as current supplemental COVID money before the end of the fiscal year?
Certainly that is the goal. That is the direction given to my staff, and I look forward to working closely with you and your staff to keep you apprised regularly as to progress we're making towards that goal.
Thank you. If Congress provides additional COVID supplemental funding, how will you ensure that the money will get out the door where it's urgently needed?
Certainly we have had this has been a learning process. This pandemic just has affected the entire world. So I'm happy to say that as a learning organization, we have improved our processes for getting money out the door expeditiously. So we're very grateful for the Congress's generosity with the past supplementals. Should there be another supplemental, I'm very confident that we have the systems in place to get money out expeditiously in a responsible manner.
Well, thank you. As I alluded to in my opening statement, there have been several recent management decisions under your leadership at USAID, and some of those are very troubling to myself and some of my colleagues. The recent influx of appointees serving in your agency with a record of homophobic, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, and other derogatory comments appears to be in direct contradiction to the agency's aims and an affront to the dedicated career staff who serve at USAID. So is this the kind of person you want representing USAID and the American people? What message are we sending to USAID employees by allowing appointees like Merritt Corrigan, who has referred to a homo empire, quote unquote, and the quote, false pretense of women's equality with men, unquote. Those are obviously troubling to us. I hope it's troubling to you, and I hope that that's not allowed to continue.
Congressman, what I could commit to you and your colleagues on the committee is that all USAID employees, regardless of hiring category, are held to the same high moral, legal, and ethical standards that USAID has always had in place.
Okay, thank you. I now turn it over to our ranking member, my friend, Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Administrator. You said my consulate in Houston just got closed yesterday. And the Chinese Communist Party has been doing this for decades. They've been stealing intellectual property. They are currently trying to steal the research and development for our vaccine for COVID-19. A virus that they are responsible for coming out of Wuhan, China, and now they want to steal our vaccine to save the world. The irony is just mind-boggling. They are a force to be reckoned with. And I think if anything comes out of this experience, this Twilight Zone experience that we're going through, it is the people are waking up to who the Chinese Communist Party are and what they had done to the world and what they have done to us for the last 2 decades. Now, your agency has a role in this. I want to commend my dear friend, I wish he was staying with us, Mr. Yoho, for his probably one of the best bills ever passed out of this committee, the BUILD Act. And the Development Finance Corporation, which is going to be our key to defeating the Chinese Communist Party in its Belt and Road Initiative in developing nations. And so my question to you is, I think the DFC has a major role. I think Adam Bowler's doing a great job. I do think Congress should fully fund the DFC. The DFC, after all, does return on its investment. It's one of those departments or agencies that actually doesn't spend all the money. Actually, money comes back to the Treasury. I mean, how about that? So my question to you is, I see USAID, there are other entities like Exim Bank, but can you explain to me how you can transform your agency to work more effectively in this countering Chinese Communist Party initiative that the DFC is taking on right now?
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Congressman. Certainly all of us, when we come to whatever positions we have, we bring our previous experiences. So certainly I came to USAID from the Department of Homeland Security, where I certainly had plenty of exposure to malicious, malevolent Chinese intent in any number of spheres. So coming over to USAID, initially heading up the Latin American Caribbean Bureau, I certainly saw firsthand how the Chinese were trying to exert their influence with debt diplomacy, onerous deals where they're taking advantage. So their businesses, there can't be a greater contrast in terms of our development roles. We have what is sincerely a construct called a journey to self-reliance, where we help countries stand up on their own with their economies, democracy, and their systems. What the Chinese model of development couldn't be more of an opposite. We seek to emphasize free, open, enterprise-driven development to build resilient market economies founded on democratic principles and good government. Certainly, the Chinese, their efforts to undermine sovereignty, leading to unsustainable debt or forfeiture of strategic resources and assets, it couldn't be further from the truth. So I agree with you. The BUILD Act has been an incredible piece of legislation. I want to thank you all for your support of that. Adam Bowler and I, Adam, of course, leading the DFC, he and I communicate regularly. As you all know, I sit on the board of DFC. So one of the things Adam and I have been able to do is ensure that we have communications at all levels between USAID and the DFC. So not only is there communication at the leadership level in Washington, D.C., and more importantly, in the field. We're working closely together. So USAID staff in the missions, in the field, are uniquely positioned to be able to find potential deals, potential private sector partners. By having that close coordination communication with the DFC, we're able to bring these potential deals and opportunities to the DFC's attention. Well, they can come in and help finance the deals. So I'm happy to say that the relationship between USAID and DFC is very strong, and looking forward to continued cooperation in years to come. So, sorry, you have a question?
No, go ahead.
No, I say one of the best ways to counter China is to continue to do what we do. We have no better development model. Our efforts to help countries stand up on their own on journey to self-reliance is vastly different from the Chinese model. So we're very proud to provide this alternative to countries, and we're very proud of our work countering China. We'll continue to do so.
Well, let me thank you for that, and thank you for your service at the Department of Homeland Security, and also it's exactly what I wanted to hear. I mean, working together, coordinating together, there's a lot of overlap between these two entities, I think. And the more you can coordinate and work together, not just to provide foreign assistance and humanitarian, which is vitally important for the nation and the world, but also in this very important foreign policy that we're embarking on to counter this malign behavior from the Chinese Communist Party. So, sir, let me just say thank you for that, and I look forward to following up with you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Barsa, I hope you take back some of the criticisms and problems that we have with what was submitted. I hope you take it back, and I hope we can have productive discussions on how to improve it. We met with Mr. Green all the time, and came up with putting our heads together and coming up with good things that are needed. So I hope we can establish that with you as well. I will now recognize members for questions under the 5-minute rule. Under House rules, all time yielded is for the purpose of questioning the witness, Because of the hybrid format of this hearing, I will recognize members by committee seniority, alternating between Democrats and Republicans. If you miss your turn, please let our staff know, and we will come back to you. If you seek recognition, you must unmute your microphone and address the chair verbally. I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Okay. We'll go to Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. Listening to the first three speakers, it's surprising to see the administration cutting our foreign assistance budget. I think the chairman and the ranking member were eloquent as to why we need to expand what we spend to help the developing world. And the acting administrator explained how the money that we do spend is spent effectively. Yet the administration seems hell-bent on cutting this aid at a time of pandemic, which is taking lives around the world, and at a time when the disruption caused by the pandemic is leading to hunger, food insecurity, and death. and at a time when this cutback is going to increase the influence of our geopolitical rival. The particular cut that is being suggested is a 35% cut from what we appropriated last year. Down to 627 is what the administration suggests, rather than the 9.5 billion we actually appropriated. And this continues a trend. It would put our aid at less than 0.1% of our GDP at a time when there's general acceptance in the international community that nations should strive to spend 0.7%, and many countries are above that, and when the average for wealthy nations is 0.4%. So I wonder if the acting administrator can explain how would you explain to our men and women in uniform that they may be deployed, they may die in future crises that could have been avoided with expenditures far lower than what we spend in defense and war? How do we explain this administration's cuts?
Congressman, as you know, the budget you have before you today was developed over a long period of time, certainly started out long before the onset of the global pandemic. So, and as you're aware, certainly...
If I can interrupt you then.
Certainly.
Then since the pandemic has arrived and Democrats have proposed substantial additional assistance in the supplemental appropriations bill, are you a strong advocate for that supplemental appropriation, knowing that the original budget that you put together was before the pandemic?
Certainly. We're in touch with OMB and State Department on a daily basis.
How much should we have in supplemental appropriations for international development aid and assistance?
OMB and the White House are fully apprised of the challenges we're seeing on a day-to-day basis.
I need a number.
I don't have a number for you, sir. That number you seek is part of a larger deliberation with OMB and the White House. It's part of a much larger package.
Can I count on you in the administration to advocate for a robust number?
You could absolutely count on me to advocate for what I believe are our needs.
In May, our colleague Ami Bera introduced, many of us co-sponsored, the bill to participate in the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations, CEPI, an alliance of countries and private partners whose mission it is to finance and coordinate the development of vaccines for high priority. The administration has talked of discontinuing the PREDICT2 program and moving to something else that seems ill-defined. Do you support CIPI? Do we continue PREDICT2? And if we're not conducting PREDICT2, what's the successor program?
Okay, regarding CEPI, we certainly recognize there's an opportunity to leverage Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, their mandate to develop vaccines. Their goals certainly align with the objectives USAID's Global Health Security Program to prevent the amplification and spread of emerging threats. So we're currently looking at potential partnership with CEPI. I have nothing to announce today, but we are having internal discussions about possible partnerships with them. Regarding the PREDICT project, the PREDICT project had a normal lifespan to it. So it was extended past its normal termination date. So what we have is a follow-on project called Stop Spillover, which is a natural follow-on to that.
Okay, so you do have a successor program. I do want to ask, your predecessor stated on the record the USAID is committed to the clearance of landmines and unexploded ordnance in Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh.
Mm-hmm.
Do you continue that dedication?
Oh, certainly, Mark Green and your predecessor's dedication was well-founded. We're happy to have received reports that we've almost had diminishing returns in terms of huge success rates in terms of the amount of work that's been cleared to date.
We still need to finish the job. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barsa, thank you, Administrator Barsa, for your testimony. Thank you for the work you're doing on COVID-19. You know, Congress, in a bipartisan way, came together and provided substantial new money to combat this insidious disease. You know, my own state of New Jersey certainly has had its disproportionality in terms of deaths and sickness. Half of all of those who have died in my state were in nursing homes. So hopefully there's some lessons learned there for all of us going forward. But again, thank you for your leadership on that. I'd like to bring up two issues. The first is the Ebola issue. I remember I chaired 4 hearings on the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone and Liberia. We all came together and we came up with significant amounts of money to combat that horrible manifestation of that disease. Likewise, that's happening again, and I know we've spent $342 million at USAID on the Ebola issue, and I want to thank you for that. And unlike Liberia and Sierra Leone, the DR Congo experience, there are now therapeutics. There's a vaccine that helps to protect our healthcare workers and, of course, other people. On June 25th, the Ministry of Health for DRC declared the end of the Ebola outbreak in eastern DRC. It's affected 3,470 confirmed cases, about 2,287 related deaths. But as you pointed out, there's a concern about a new outbreak. Maybe you could speak to that because vigilance obviously needs to be very robust. And again, thank you for the deployment. It's a story that has not been told by the media or anybody else, that there has been vaccinations. I remember we had the doctor from Samaritan's Purse, after he healed, having gone to Texas, come and testify at my hearing. He was one of the lucky ones who survived. So many others obviously succumbed to death. But all those lessons learned from that horrible experience have now been applied. And our government, under both administrations, the previous and this one, continue to work hard to find therapeutics and vaccines. So you might want to speak to that. Secondly, on the desert locust crisis, I've introduced a bill, Joyvo, my good friend and colleague from California, that frankly sets up a working group to try to be proactive on this locust problem. Obviously, it's Ms. Bass, who's our chairwoman. I'm the ranking member of the Africa Committee. We made it clear that we really want a more, a forward-thinking. This isn't the last time the potential of a crisis here exists. We're going to see it again and again. So this working group would come up with best practices on eradication, hopefully on killing these bugs before they ravish the crops. And the food insecurity issue, FAO and others have all pointed to, a looming crisis, but I still don't think we've done enough. I'm not saying you, but I think as a world, we've put $20 million into the effort, but perhaps you could speak to that as well, because you and I have talked so many times over the last 5 months. Kip Tom, who's our ambassador to the UN food agencies, I've talked to him several times as well. This idea of a new bill, and thankfully the chairman's putting it on the docket for next week, would create a working group that would really, hopefully, be forward-thinking and do even more to mitigate this crisis.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your longtime support of USAID. It truly is the honor and privilege of a lifetime to lead the talented men and women of USAID, specifically when you see how, for the Ebola, for our disaster assistance response teams, the way they deploy into the face of whatever crisis, and the way, as you mentioned, the Ebola, the Herculean efforts in combating Ebola. We're so happy to see that, while the outbreak in eastern DRC, has ended, we remain very concerned and vigilant. We're monitoring nearly 1,200 Ebola survivors in the East DRC. We're monitoring the new outbreak in the Northwest DRC. And we're always on the lookout. We're cognizant of the constant threats of new Ebola outbreaks occurring not just in the DRC, but other African countries as well. So one of the things we're able to do is, as the outbreak was coming to an end in the East, we're able to pivot resources and redeploy staff and equipment to deal with the outbreak. So watching the professionalism of the men and women who are able to do that, it's a great source of pride for me. And certainly I've learned a lot since becoming acting administrator at USAID, and part of what I've learned is the life cycle of a locust. Certainly, with the economic contraction and the pandemic, food insecurity is very much on my mind, particularly in Africa. So one of the things I've learned, so certainly while aerial spraying is the preferred method to treat infestations, it has to occur in certain periods of the life cycle, after the locusts hatch, but before they grow wings. So what is key then is monitoring to ensure that the available aircraft with pesticides can deploy during that window. So it has been challenging to maintain monitoring with the pandemic and some rains that are occurring right now. But we are adding additional resources to the monitoring to ensure that our partners at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, can deploy aircraft and pesticides to meet and get to the locusts during that crucial period when they're most vulnerable to eradication.
Thank you so very much. Chairman?
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, we're now going to call on Mr. Meeks, who is coming here. He's not here, but he's going to come to
I'm
us.
here, though.
I know.
Can you hear me?
All New Yorkers are always here. So,
But thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first echo your concern about the appointment of Ms. Corrigan, given the record of statements, and I believe bigoted comments that she's made, and there should not be any tolerance for that at USAID or anyone that is heading an agency such as that. So I want to, first say that I strongly support your comments earlier, and it's particularly important because most of us, just about all of us in the United States Congress this week are very heavy-hearted and have a very heavy heart today with the passing of a great American and a true humanitarian, Congressman John Robert Lewis. And annually, Representative Lewis and I, along with Representative Hastings, have proposed language to the State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill supporting efforts to foster diversity and inclusion in international affairs and provide protection for minority and indigenous populations abroad. So this year is no different. And in my estimation, there is no greater way to honor and continue Representative Lewis's legacy than by bolstering diversity and inclusion initiatives here in the United States and abroad. I'm going to have probably more questions than I expect we'll be able to, Mr. Ambassador Barsa, you'll be able to answer. So I'm going to try to ask them quickly, but maybe before also afterwards, or I should say afterwards, you'll give me some answers in writing if I can't get to all of them. So let me also say that I want to reflect to the record that I believe that the administration's requested budget cuts to humanitarian accounts are the wrong thing to do morally, and it also absolutely sends the wrong message to the world. So my first question, Mr. Ambassador, is do you agree that upholding diversity and inclusion while allocating and distributing U.S. foreign assistance is in our national interest? Do you agree with that?
microphone.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I very much value diversity and inclusion. Yes.
So therefore, there should be accountability in that regards. And the first critical step to accountability on diversity and inclusion is tracking and reporting granular data as it relates to the companies, the organizations that USAID contracts with. So does USAID today capture self-reported data on the composition of the companies it contracts with as it relates to gender, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation of shareholders, the board, and senior management?
We certainly have the same high standards for diversity and inclusion, all the work. You're asking about the certainly mechanics and how we hold our partners accountable. I'm afraid I don't have that data with me, but I'm happy to respond to a question for the record or work with you and your staff afterwards.
Very good. I'd like to see the data if you have it, if it's on record, so that we can see it and know what kind of, the number of African Americans that are on these various boards, et cetera, the diversity of the companies that you're working with, so that we see the transparency. And I would say that it would be a good idea that if you have this data, that it be published annually for transparency and for accountability. And I'd also like to work with you in regards to being committed to erasing the barriers for companies, including, Mexicans know that we're working together so that small and minority-owned and disadvantaged businesses, enterprises, and universities and non-governmental organizations currently encounter that many have come to me about encountering difficulties navigating the acquisitions and assistance process at USAID. So I'd love to work with you on that in the future. Time is running out quickly. Let me just run this right past you. I'm concerned. We often talk about providing alternative development solutions to Chinese loans in Africa. However, the Chinese have effectively mobilized billions in loans each year to strategically gain access to major ports, railways, and other vital infrastructure and markets in Africa. And we have the largest financial markets in the world. And I believe we can make deep inroads and have a greater impact in Africa by USAID. So I'd like to talk to you in regards to that. Also, I just want to bring to your attention and ask you about, the COVID pandemic has been devastating to livelihoods of hundreds of millions in Africa, as well as those of African descent. Likewise, as we talk about, Colombia, you know very well that I've been one of the co-chairs of the Colombia Caucus, and Colombia is one of our strongest allies in the Western Hemisphere. And I would hope that we would have a plan, and we were looking at, to make sure that African Colombians and indigenous community leaders we are protecting African Colombians and indigenous communities with USAID funds and assistance and efforts to protect these individuals. I see I'm out of time, so I yield back, but I look forward to talking to you. And if you can answer some of these questions in writing afterwards, or let's set up a meeting so that we can talk about some of these important issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Meeks. I wonder if the witness would like to answer some of those questions.
The witness would like to answer all the questions. Certainly, there was a lot of topics covered there. So, Congressman Meeks, certainly, as we've discussed before, as you may be aware and others may be aware, as a former staffer here in the House of Representatives, working for a former member here, I fully appreciate the role of Congress, not just appropriations and authorization, but oversight. So I certainly value, and I know intuitively, the best government is government where there is communication. So if I don't get to anything right now during my testimony, look forward to going back with QFRs and continued conversations at any point in time. So a lot of things are being touched on right there. Certainly, and I'll try to get them in order, regarding infrastructure investments by the Chinese in Africa. Certainly, as we've discussed before, the partnership between USAID and the DFC is key in terms of helping identify other investments that we can make. One of the best things we can do to counter Chinese influence, Chinese investments, is to gather information of onerous deals where the Chinese take advantage of other countries and their vulnerabilities and share that with other host countries so they don't go down the same path and allow the Chinese to take advantage of them. So we do work on the information sharing. We also work on alternatives to development investment. Regarding Afro-Colombians, so certainly heading up the Latin American Caribbean Bureau, when I traveled to Colombia, it was a great honor and privilege to meet with Afro-Colombian leaders within Colombia and other groups that have been traditionally disenfranchised. And I was proud to see the work USAID does in empowering them and helping ensure they are fully integrated into the economy and society. So I'm pleased with the work going in Colombia. Understand there's more to be done, but I'm very proud of the steps we've made. Congressman, there was another issue. I should have written it down. But anything I haven't got to, happy to respond to QFRs or follow-up meetings or phone calls.
Yeah, there were a few other questions that Mr. Meeks had, and so we'll follow up with you.
Okay. Happy to.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, will the chair yield for a question?
What? Who is asking? Oh, well, I'm about to call on Mr. Chabot because he was here.
So no.
Well, I'm willing to. Mr. Chabot.
Go ahead, if it's quick, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Chair.
Mr.
It's
Mayor.
simply a question. Mr. Meeks was looking for diversity numbers, and I was wondering, is there a metric that Mr. Meeks wanted to see met, not just these numbers out of the blue? Was there an expectation? Maybe Mr. Meeks could answer that later on somebody else's time, but that was the question. What number does he want to see met for all of those things that he was asking about?
All right, thank you, Mr. Mast. Mr. Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you, Mr. Barsa, for being here today and answering our questions. A number of us on both sides of the aisle have done a lot of work on the Rohingya genocide over the years, and I want to particularly recognize somebody who's not here or somebody that's not in Congress anymore, and that's Joe Crawley, who had been very involved in this for a long time, and I'd worked directly with him. I can't tell you the amount of work and how committed he was to this cause. There's a lot of other people, but he's not here to pat himself on the back, so I will. I mean, he was very committed, and he's a real loss to this institution, I believe. But so I was hoping that you could update us, Mr. Barsa, kind of on what's going on. What's the outlook on the intermediate, long term for the Rohingya, and how does the administration's budget request reflect efforts to support the Rohingya, as well as to hold the Burmese military accountable and alleviate the desperation of 1 million Rohingya refugees who are currently in Bangladesh rather than in their own country?
Thank you, Congressman. Certainly in relationship to our government-to-government contacts, I would have to refer you to the State Department. What I am proud to report, since August 2017, the United States has provided more than $951 million in emergency assistance to assist in the Rohingya. This support is to the refugees, the affected host communities in Bangladesh, and multiple conflict-affected populations within Burma with humanitarian development assistance. We work with impacted host communities by providing support and development assistance. For example, 17% of the people in Cox's Bazar live below the extreme poverty line, which is a full 5% higher than the rest of the community, the rest of the country. And we fully recognize that host communities have borne the socioeconomic brunt of the Rohingya refugee influx. So our efforts go into support not just the refugees themselves, but those host communities who are sheltering and give them space. So I wish I had an answer as to when this crisis would end, but we're doing what we can to support the Rohingya.
Thank you very much. With all that's going on around the globe and in this country, it's easy for us not necessarily to remember those people, but there are an awful lot of people suffering. So, and I know the administration is committed to improving that, and we want to thank you for that. I'll move to another line. Last year, Congressman Connolly and I, in a bipartisan manner, introduced the Global Health Security Act, which I'm pleased to say was included in this year's NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, in which, among other things, affirms U.S. commitment to the global health security agenda. Could you discuss how investments made under the global health security agenda have helped member countries cope with the latest global health security crisis, COVID-19?
Thank you, Congressman. The United States of America and the United States people, by extension, are the most generous people in the history of the world. So our investments over decades in global health have enabled countries not just to deal with a crisis or an outbreak at hand, but to build infrastructure and capacity. So we know, for example, clean water is an essential health service, and not all the countries have able to provide clean water to all the populations the way they should. So part of the larger health investments we make are things like access to wash, clean water and access to sanitation. So a country's ability to respond to the pandemic isn't just access availability to PPE. It is the infrastructure that has been developed with the assistance of USAID over decades to help with detection, with communications, with all manner of services. Healthcare responses are best built upon an existing infrastructure. And so we're proud to be I'm proud to be leading the agency.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I'm trying to get one more question in, so I'll cut you off there. I apologize. But the United States can't solve every problem. We wish we could, but we can't solve every problem around the globe. Could you identify some problems that you took a hard look at when crafting this budget and said this is just a problem the taxpayers couldn't or shouldn't have to foot the bill?
I don't have a specific example, but certainly we realize that USAID can't do it alone. So I'm happy to report that I have had regular meetings with counterparts in the UK, Canada, to realize that a lot of developmental challenges are challenges that the developed world should tackle together. So while we are the most generous country in the history of the world, the most generous country now in development assistance, fully cognizant that not all the stress should be borne on our shoulders and that we should be working collaboratively with other countries.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yield back, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We now go to Mr. Deutsch of Florida, who is with us virtually. How's the weather down there?
We're doing okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks, Acting Administrator Barsa, for your testimony. We appreciate you joining us for this important hearing. For nearly 60 years across both Democratic and Republican administrations, USAID has performed invaluable life-saving work around the world, from combating the spread of HIV/AIDS to providing access to safe water and family planning to investing in nutrition and education. And in an era of unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe, even before COVID-19, the dollars invested in U.S. foreign assistance helped make our country safer. And during the pandemic, the importance of USAID has only grown. The supplemental funding for USAID's humanitarian accounts is a critical tool in the global pandemic response. As chairman of the Middle East Subcommittee, I know how critical our aid is to Middle East and North Africa, where over $150 million provided to MENA countries supports pandemic response as well as vulnerable refugee populations. But there's more work to do, and now more than ever, reckless cuts to U.S. foreign assistance only undermine U.S. national security and global stability. USAID's importance and the importance of U.S. foreign assistance, particularly as we're seeking now for global health, is an issue of bipartisan agreement, and all of us on this committee, including my friends across the aisle, have rejected and will continue to reject cuts to USAID's budget that politicize the agency's work, undermine its effectiveness, and threaten global and U.S. national security. And Acting Administrator, the bipartisanship is why I must join my colleagues in expressing deep concerns about recent appointments at the agency. For the president to knowingly appoint people with a history of derogatory comments about refugees, LGBTQ people, and women, which also deeply contradicts USAID's mission, actually undermines the important efforts of USAID around the world. Their past statements call into question their ability to effectively lead this important agency and its dedicated workforce. And I am not so inclined, Acting Administrator Barsa, to share your full confidence in these appointees. And I would urge you to reconsider your support for their appointments. Now, my remaining time, I'd like to ask about the region that I focus much of my time on, and in particular, the West Bank. In August 2018, the administration announced a freeze on all assistance to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, subject to a White House review. At the end of 2019, Congress passed a law that I authored with Mr. Wilson to help remove legal barriers and restore Palestinian assistance. The assistance, as you know, provides funding to things like hospitals in East Jerusalem, Israeli-Palestinian coexistence programs. It fosters stability, which benefits and strengthens the security of both Palestinians and Israelis, and it furthers the prospects for peace. But since the bill passed, the administration has continued its effective freeze. The USAID mission to the Palestinians is effectively closed, except for a few staff members who work on regional programming. In April, the U.S. provided $5 million in international disaster assistance funds to help meet the challenges of COVID-19 in the West Bank. When Congress approved $75 million in economic support funds in a bipartisan way, subject to all existing laws and conditions in FY20 that the administration has not yet spent. And on July 9th, the House Appropriations Committee passed a bill providing $225 million for development and humanitarian assistance in the West Bank and Gaza. Can you tell us, Acting Administrator Barsa, what is the status of the administration's review of Palestinian assistance, and will it be completed in time to program the $225 million that the House recently appropriated?
Congressman, thank you for your question. Thank you for your long-standing support of USAID, and thank you for your efforts passing ATCA. So I wish I had an answer telling you that the interagency deliberations have completed, but discussions on how best to implement ATCA are still taking place at the interagency level, and I look forward to working with you and your staff once I have something to report on the implementation. But it is currently being reviewed to find how best we can move forward.
I appreciate that, Acting Administrator Barsa. Can you provide some light into what that interagency process looks like? Who has reviewed? Who still hasn't reviewed? What needs to happen for that to be completed?
Unfortunately, I don't have the details. Certainly, as any major policy, there are many actors who need to be consulted with, but these internal deliberations are still ongoing, and I really I share your hope that these deliberations can finish shortly so we can report back to you on how we're moving forward.
I appreciate that. Are you a part of those deliberations?
My staff is, yes, certainly.
Okay. So, and presumably they report back to you. Can you share with us who else is part of that process? It's just been ongoing for a long time, and certainly it feels like it's being dragged along. Who else is participating in those?
I'm afraid I can't comment on those internal deliberations, sir. But I share your desire that the internal deliberations do conclude rapidly so we can move forward, which is the intent of Congress. I fully understand and appreciate that.
I appreciate that. Again, the goal is to strengthen security and stability to advance the prospects for peace. That's what this funding can do if we can get through this process once and for all. And I appreciate your commitment to help see it through, and hopefully quickly. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Deutsch. We now go to Mr. Perry.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Barsa. Appreciate you being here. Administrator, you said earlier this year that the USAID should not be doing and does not do works untethered from national security. I think, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Sound about familiar? Okay. Is it your assessment that the state and foreign appropriations bill under consideration pursues agenda items that engage in works untethered from national security policy currently?
I haven't seen the details of the legislation, but certainly it's my belief, certainly conversations with other members of the interagency, we're all in agreement that USAID is the method of smart power or soft power. Since our inception in 1961, USAID has played a role in the national security apparatus, and we're proud to do so.
Anything in particular that you would like to elaborate on based on your experience that you've seen in the past that you would prefer not to, for us not to continue to engage on, or expectations you have in the conversations that you've had about what we will be forced to engage in based on the agenda in the appropriations bill as you understand it?
I'm afraid I'm not quite sure I understand your question, sir.
So is there anything that we're going to fund and force USAID to do in the past that we shouldn't be, or that you think that we're going to be?
I'm not cognizant of anything.
Okay. All right. How do you think that USAID can help counter the malign actors like Russia and China in the Arctic?
Well, in the Arctic, that's a little bit outside of my zone. I certainly do not have a mission in the Arctic, so I'd have to maybe perhaps defer.
Should we? I'm serious. I mean, they're there, and you're an instrument of national diplomacy and national security, and you're not present, right? But they are.
In terms of economic development program, soft power projection, no, I am not currently in the Arctic.
And we shouldn't be, as far as you're concerned.
Well, we're certainly looking at always opportunities. For example, in Greenland, we're part to be proud of the stand-up of the mission there. We're certainly looking for opportunities. We have no commitment yet on programming in Greenland, but we're certainly looking at ways that we can build our expertise to help out there if need be.
Okay, and is China and Russia also pursuing opportunities in that location and others adjacent?
In terms of their activities in the Arctic, I'd have to refer you to state or DOD.
Okay. What do you think that there are some of the more successful tactics in pushing back against the Belt and Road Initiative, both on the state and local level from your agencies or your directorate's standpoint?
I think one of the best things we could do to counter the Belt and Road Initiative is to communicate. As I said previously, one of the best things we have to counter China is to let people know and build awareness about our true and honest pathway to self-reliance. Our development models could not be more diverse. So certainly when I was leading the Latin American Caribbean Bureau, one of the things I was emphasizing was information sharing within the Western Hemisphere. So if there was an attempt by the Chinese to engage in a country, whispering sweet nothings in their ear, trying to lead them down the path to lead to debt diplomacy or onerous deals favoring Chinese companies, one of the things where I was trying to emphasize then, and I'm emphasizing now, is the ability to communicate, to have my teams, my missions in the field, share information of Chinese past practices. Because once other countries realize the pattern of behavior by the Chinese, the information becomes more clear. Then when the United States, through our programming, our work with the DFC, we can provide alternatives, then it's much easier. So the best thing we have to counter Chinese influence is to be honest and open and tell people what they are. Faulty PPE during the COVID pandemic, deals that only favor Chinese companies. There is a slew of evidence to show that our model is the preferred model.
Do you think you've been successful? I mean, does it work? Because obviously the communication, I would agree, is important, but money talks, right? And most of these places, they're very aggressively seeking financial assistance in that regard. And so while the rhetoric and the track record is certainly viable, but money talks. So how successful have you been?
We've been pretty successful. So, so money does talk, but then there's the short-term money. It's like, okay, you can get a whole bunch of money from the Chinese right now, but long-term, to show that you're going to be strangled by debt for decades and you're going to lose sovereignty and autonomy, that's part of the thing. So part of what we try to do by communicating is realizing, hey, this short-term check you're going to get from the Chinese, you're going to be paying that back for decades. You're going to lose autonomy. You're going to lose sovereignty. So money does talk. So part of what we try to do is to communicate the long-term financial implications and the political implications.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. We now go to Mr. Keating virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Acting Administrator, you say you coordinate with the Department of Defense and Health and Human Services. I'm on Armed Services as well. Were you notified in February when, for the first time in our history, a pandemic was put us on a level 1 alert from the Department of Defense? Did they communicate to you if you coordinated?
Certainly. I had, in February, I was still leading the Latin American Caribbean Bureau of USAID, so I'm afraid I don't have any answers as to what may have been communicated with the DoD at that time. Happy to provide an answer for the record.
Thank you so much. I also chair the subcommittee. We've had hearings on Europe and Eurasia. Our allies have come together in unprecedented ways in Europe surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. Don't we have a force multiplier in general and specifically on this by working with our closest allies?
Oh, we do, absolutely, sir.
Do you think it undercuts everything you've said this morning in that case when there was a global response pledge by these allies and looking at North America alone, Canada was a co-chair, even Mexico participated in this, yet the U.S. is absent. 47 countries pledging to this. And do you think that undercuts our efforts? We're sending at best a mixed message. Can you explain why that's in our best interest not to work with our allies on the global response pledge?
Regarding the specifics of that pledge, I really can't comment on that. But what I can tell you is
Mr. Acting Administrator, they've raised over $18 billion together on this, but the U.S. is absent.
In terms of the actual interaction, I would have to get back with you on details, but what I can tell you, I am in regular contact with my counterparts in the developed world, the UK, Canada, and other contact group countries. So we are in
Contact
coordination.
is one thing. We just said, sorry, my time is limited, Acting Administrator, but we just said money matters. So, it's nice to be in contact. Look at Mexico is involved in this. 47 countries are involved. And we're absent. It just strikes me as we're making a statement and a contradictory one to everything you said.
Well, Congressman, I'm afraid I'm sorry. We may have some connectivity issues. In terms of the larger principle of coordinating with other donor countries, that is very important, and we certainly do that. I can't really comment. I'm happy to get back to you in terms of that specific argument. But just because we coordinate internationally doesn't mean that every venue. Coordination happens in a variety of different ways.
Okay.
But this is such a pronounced one. It's a global pledge. And this is a no-brainer for the U.S. And we're not there. So I really think it's sending some kind of message to our closest allies that undercuts everything you're working for at USAID. And I find it just not only contradictory, but mind-boggling that we're not part of this. In any case, I just question, too, when we're pulling out of the WHO, does not that hurt our ability to work along the same lines you're saying? I agree, and you'll never get a better supporter for USAID than I am. And this is something that's bipartisan on the committee. But when you're having these other major actions being taken, you can't see how that undercuts your mission.
Congressman, thank you for your long-term support for USAID. We are very grateful for that. Just a little bit of context on the World Health Organization. So last year, the World Health Organization received 4% of overall U.S. funding on global health issues. 96% of our funds went to organizations or activities outside of the World Health Organization. So, and since a decision was made to withdraw, we've been actively looking for alternative partners. Our commitment to global health remains strong. We will not be retreating from any corner of the world stage when it comes to global health matters.
Thank you. We're going to have to leave it at that.
But I've got 10 seconds left. If you're looking for things, how about the global pledge, global response? It's there, right in our face. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Elliott Engel, and we appreciate your strong and long-time bipartisan efforts on behalf of our country. I'm also grateful, Administrator Barsa, that you're here. Your prior service as a congressional staffer, you worked with a superstar, Lincoln Diaz-Balart, so I know you're well-trained. And indeed, with our colleagues, Congressman Deutsch and Keating, I have a great appreciation of what USAID has achieved around the world. And you should, correctly as you have, pointed out we're the most generous nation in the history of the world. And in line with that, with the Wuhan virus global pandemic, it's exacerbating the existing humanitarian crises around the world, including, as the World Food Program has estimated, that there will be an 82% increase in people needing food assistance as a result of the pandemic. How is USAID prioritizing food security to respond to this?
Thank you, Congressman. And yes, it was an honor to serve under Lincoln Diaz-Balart as well. I'm certainly grateful for that in my life. My first full day as acting administrator USAID was on April 13th. On that day, I sent out a video to the entire USAID workforce laying out my 3 priorities. Priority 1 was the physical and emotional well-being of staff. Priority number 2 was continuing our important cooperations around the world. And priority number 3 was thinking through the second and third order effects of the pandemic. It was clear to me as I assumed the reins of my current position that the secondary, tertiary effects of the pandemic, its effect on fragile societies, economies, and democracies where things are going to be with us for a while. Understanding this, seeing this coming down, I set up a planning cell within USAID. We're calling it the Over the Horizon Task Force. Part of the goal of this task force was to break outside of silos and think collectively about the challenges that USAID is going to be faced with, not just in the next 3 months or 6 months, but next 3, 6, 5, 10 years down the road. So food insecurity is certainly one of those challenges. As we've seen, we have economic contraction throughout the world, which has led to disruptions in supply chains, abilities for people to harvest food, get food to market. So we're very concerned about that. So our USAID partner, FuseNet, they forecast globally a 25% increase in the number of food insecure people in 46 vulnerable countries. So we're very much looking at, again, the secondary and third order effects of the pandemic. This Over the Horizon Task Force, their work should be completed by the end of the fiscal year, and the data they provide from this comprehensive view is going to inform not just our decision making at USAID, but it'll inform conversations with OMB, and the products of that analysis will be shared with you and your colleagues here to help inform your decision making as well.
Additionally, I'm really encouraged to see our relationship with India developing. I was honored to be with President Trump and Prime Minister Modi in Houston, the largest welcome program in the history of the United States, to welcome a foreign head of state. To see the relationship and the positive development that Prime Minister Modi's achieved, the world's largest democracy, America, the oldest democracy. What is our relationship now with India?
I think it's a wonderful success story because our relationship has evolved from a traditional donor-recipient relationship to a peer-to-peer relationship. We're actually right now we're proposing a U.S.-India Development Foundation where we would help India mobilize their own resources to address the country's most serious developmental challenges, looking to use innovative finance tools. So that peer-to-peer relationship we have, there's something we're extremely proud of, and we look forward to working with them.
And then another issue that has to be addressed is human trafficking. And so what are you proposing to address this?
Well, again, similar to food insecurity, I'm concerned about human trafficking as well, because certainly, again, during this COVID-affected world, we're seeing malign actors, not just at the state level, but criminal elements as well, trying to take advantage of the situation. So all of our programming has historically had an aspect of countering human trafficking, trying to give light to it, trying to give capacity building and reporting and whatnot. So again, just like food insecurity, I'm afraid on the human trafficking front, we may be seeing increases. I don't have the data in front of me right now, but my gut tells me that we need to be more on the lookout for that, and that's certainly the message I'm putting out to our missions.
Well, we're grateful for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We now go to Mr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I think about, one of the best investments that we've made, post-World War II, it really has been the aid and development plan. If you think about the history of what we've been able to accomplish in the last 75 years, the Marshall Plan, probably the most successful aid and development plan ever in the history of the world. Rebuilding Japan, stepping up and taking Korea from one of the poorest nations in the world 40 years ago to this remarkable developed economy. And, Acting Administrator, you talked about PEPFAR and the millions of lives that investment has saved. That's a testimony to the real impact of aid and development around the world, but also to the men and women that serve us, are partnering and implementing agencies and NGOs, and I thank them for the work that they do every day. We face this unprecedented, challenge, probably the biggest global challenge since World War II in the global pandemic, COVID-19. And Mr. Keating alluded to this a little bit, and Mr. Sherman also talked about the legislation to authorize CEPI that Congressman Yoho and myself have introduced, the SAFE Act, Securing America from Epidemics. We think this is a smart piece of legislation, and authorizing and funding CEPI would be incredibly helpful. We also know the global alliance that's coming together with Gavi and CEPI, and I appreciate your mentioning Gavi in your opening remarks. Part of this is the COVAX pillar, which is part of Gavi's initiative. When we think about it, there's roughly 200 COVID-19 vaccines currently under development around the world. And that's why we need something like this COVAX pillar. We may need more than one vaccine to beat this virus. We don't know which country is going to develop that vaccine, but we do know if we all work together at a global level, if, for instance, the United Kingdom comes up with the successful vaccine for seniors, the United States may come up with one that works better for kids. We've got to all work together. And, I think the President said it, Dr. Fauci said it, and as a physician, I believe that until we find a safe and effective vaccine, manufacture not 300 million doses for the United States, but 6 to 7 billion doses potentially for the world, and then distribute and vaccinate the world, we won't defeat this virus. So, I think that's why it's incredibly important for us to be part of this global alliance with Gavi, with CEPI, et cetera. And, it's kind of this principle of safety in numbers that, we don't know which vaccine is going to work, and we can pool resources from around the world. It doesn't preclude what the administration's doing in terms of bilateral agreements. I believe it's complementary to some of these bilateral agreements with the manufacturers. Acting Administrator Barsa, would you share that opinion that it's important for us to be part of this global vaccine coalition, and how best can we engage in this?
Oh, absolutely, I do agree with you. Certainly, we're proud of our work with Gavi, and again, for CEPI, we are looking at ways we could potentially partner with them. But one of the things I think it's worth reiterating is vaccines are just one portion of the response. The holistic response to not just this pandemic, but other healthcare emergencies. As again, I mentioned before, my belief in the importance of having access to water and sanitation services. So a response to a pandemic, while vaccines are important, the holistic approach that we have at USAID gets to the infrastructure, helping governments respond to the health crises. Oftentimes you'll see a health crisis and it follows a political border, because sometimes there are challenges in terms of governance, a government's ability to provide clean water, clean services, which is why our health accounts being fully integrated with the rest of our development portfolio, we feel is the best way to build capacity for governments to strengthen their health systems and response. But we certainly agree with the critical role vaccines have. Should we have a vaccine, that is a portion of it. Access to clean water, any other things also are critical. So proud to have that integrated here in USAID.
Great, and in my remaining time, a few members have brought up the Chinese approach. You've brought it up, the economic coercion, et cetera. We'll never have the resources as a single nation to necessarily combat the billions that China is able to do. You touched on multilateral coalitions of like-minded nations, and certainly when I've talked to the EU, our allies in Australia, et cetera. Can you maybe give a quick example of some of the multilateral conversations that are taking place with regards to aid and development?
We're certainly, similarly as I mentioned to the DFC, communications between organizations occurs at different levels. Certainly at the staff level, we're coordinating with the EU and others, and I've participated in contact meetings and virtually via Zoom with counterparts in the UK, Canada, and the rest of the development world. So we are discussing at different levels.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have to go to Mr. Yoho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate it. Mr. Barsa, thank you for being here. I appreciate the accolades Mr. McCall said about the DFC, but that was a team effort. That was this body, that was Congress working the way it's supposed to on a bilateral, bipartisan manner. And we need to continue that because we're focusing on what's best for America. And if we do that, things work out a lot better instead of dividing. What the DFC does need, and that's for all the members here, is it's critical that it has equity authority. We put in $150 million that would run that, but only if it has equity authority. If not, we need $1 billion for that to work properly. And I know you know the numbers. You've talked with Adam Bowler, and it's imperative that when you're talking to the administration or members of the Appropriations Committee, your ex-boss, recommend to him and how important it is to have that. I want to move on, and I want to go into some things. And I tend to be real blunt on things, and I know I offend some people sometimes. I know that's hard for people to understand, and I don't mean to. It's to call things out. And I heard Gregory Meeks talking about, and I got the utmost respect for Gregory Meeks, the diversity, hiring, and things like that, so that we have an array of all people involved. And I agree with that 100%. But do you feel, or are you mandated by Congress that that is the role of you as the administrator for USAID, or should there be a separate GAO person to do that, or a special diversity inspector general? Real quickly, if you could answer that.
Certainly, my time in and out of government for decades of service, certainly different. Every organization has Office of Civil Rights or Diversity. Certainly, I do believe in having the need for having a diverse and inclusive workforce, and to make sure that everyone has opportunities, not just in hiring, but in able to advance in terms of overall responsibilities and who should be in charge for the executive branch.
Okay, and his question was, he wanted the numbers on that. We've had that mandate for a long period of time, right? Do you have any feeling it is not being fulfilled?
I'm certainly cognizant that we can do better. So we recently had a GAO report that showed where USAID is doing better, and I embrace the report and look forward to committing to improve at USAID, certainly within my span of control, what I can do at USAID.
And that's all you can do?
Yes, sir.
What I want you to do is, you've got people that monitor that stuff, that make sure that's done. Your job is to make the mission and get responses from the mission. As I look at what you do, I've got this pie chart, and I'm sure you've seen it. It's from CRS, July 17, 2020, and it talks about, where the money goes in USAID. 26% humanitarian, 32% health and population, 12%. But when it comes down to the things that really make a difference in a country, which is infrastructure development, and I know that kind of flows into DFC, there's only 3% that goes in that. We're talking about Ebola. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Ebola was discovered in the early 70s, about 74. The Canadians had a vaccine that was going through phase 1 trials. I think it was in 76 or 78, and it was tabled. Since the discovery of that virus, there's been a total of 12,950 people die from Ebola. Total. All right? So we knew about it. We could have done something, and this is why it's important that the bill Ami Bear and I have co-sponsored for the authorization, the SAFE Act, for CEPI is so critical that we get that through there, because what CEPI does, as you know, coordinates efforts between other nations to bring this together so that we're ahead of the next zoonotic. And it's important that we do that. I think your mission, and I don't want to tell you what your mission is, but you should triage any country we go into. And I hear this body wanting to ding a president because he's cutting budgets. In medicine, with your eyes, there's myopia, there's hyperopia, and then there's another one called fecalopia. One is nearsighted, one is farsighted, and the other one is self-explanatory. We, as a body, if we don't focus 15 or 20 years from now where this country is going to go, you think this budget cut is bad today? Look at the pandemic. Look at the decrease in revenues. Look at the unemployment. And this body wants to ding a president. By God, it's time that we raise up our vision and we look down the road of where America is going, because China is killing us around the world. I shouldn't say killing. They're beating us around the world, and we can do better, and we need to do better. And it's people like you and your organization that if you focus on the mission, you're going to make a significant impact for generations to come. And if we don't, we'll be but a footnote in history. I yield back, and I'm sorry I didn't ask you a question.
But we enjoyed it anyway, Mr. Yoho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Titus, virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the administrator for being here. You know, I so admire the work of USAID. I've encountered parts of or members of your team of all around the country and places I've visited through the House Democracy Partnership. And I always think that you do so much with so little. And the soft power that you exhibit and you provide is such a big part of our diplomacy, and that keeps us from having to use military means. But I'm a little concerned with or not a little, I'm a lot concerned with some of the people that you have on your team, and you've defended them recently. And I know that Merritt Corrigan has been mentioned, but she's not alone as somebody who has made statements that are contrary to, I think, what should be the goal or the mission of USAID, indeed what has been stated as the mission. You've got Merritt Corrigan, who called the U.S. a homo empire with a tyrannical LGBT agenda and said that women's biological imperative is to be mothers. You got Mark Lloyd, and he is the new religious freedom advisor who has shared numerous Islamophobic posts to his Twitter and Facebook pages, even called Islam a barbaric cult. And then there's Patrina Mosley, who is advisor to you on the Center of Excellence on Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. She comes from the Family Research Council that has been designated a hate group that spews anti-LGBT views and opposes sexual and reproductive rights. Now, USAID's role is to champion the values of respect, empowerment, and diversity around the globe. You want inclusion, you want equality, you have a zero tolerance policy against discrimination and harassment. I wonder how you reconcile these people's backgrounds and agendas with the agenda of the agency, how you are keeping track on what's going on in these various minority groups with these people now in charge of it, and how we're going to deal with that during this COVID pandemic, which often exacerbates the discrimination and harassment of these very same groups.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for your long-term support for USAID. As Mr. Congressman Yoho alluded, and as everyone else has alluded, the importance of the USAID mission is critical. We are mission-focused, and I can, again, assure you and your colleagues that every USAID employee, regardless of hiring category, is held to the highest legal, moral, and ethical standards that USAID has always had.
Well, it just seems a little contrary to what you're supposed to be doing to have people in these leadership positions who take contrary positions or have a contrary agenda. How are you checking on some of this policy? How are you monitoring maybe the impacts of COVID on the global LGBT community or on women's rights in some of these places where the virus has led to more violence, perhaps, or more harassment, more discrimination? If you've got people in charge of these divisions who don't really have that mission in their heart, even if that's what it says on their application form.
Well, certainly, as I mentioned before, so early on, it was clear to me that this pandemic was more than just a healthcare crisis. The effect on fragile societies, democracies, and economies are going to be long-term and serious. So when you have economic contraction in any country of the world, you often see things that flow from that. Some of that is increased levels of violence, as we spoke before, possibilities of human trafficking, and particularly for women and other minorities who are more vulnerable. Women throughout the world have a greater percentage of involvement in informal economies, for example. So when you have economic contractions, those informal economies are the ones that are most often affected first. So in terms of the onset of the pandemic, our concern is that because of the secondary, tertiary effects of this pandemic, a lot of our work promoting inclusion and for women into the workplace into the economies and societies, our protection of LGBTI, a lot of these things are put at risk. So we are increasing our surveillance on all these efforts, and we're doing our best to rise up to the challenges as they present themselves.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that's the case. I know that people don't work for USAID because of the money. It's not a job that they're going to get rich on. They do it because they care, that it's in their heart to go and pursue these kinds of programs abroad. It helps the people there, and then it also helps us. Just seems to me that it would be extremely difficult to pursue that agenda of equality and empowerment if you don't have it in your heart. And apparently in the hearts of many of the people you've got at the top levels, it's a very different kind of feeling that's not about those things that USAID has long stood for and pursued. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. Mr. Mast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most in this hearing, I don't know how many are still watching online, but it seems most have left. But an argument that I've heard over and over bipartisanly is one of the most frustrating arguments that I hear coming off of Capitol Hill. It's bullshit. That's the best way that I can say it. And this is the argument, that people come into this room and stand on this hill and continually say, well, what do I say to the service member going overseas that we could have prevented it by sending some U.S. taxpayer dollars somewhere else? That is a false narrative. It is a false argument that it is either one or the other. Either we send something over in terms of USAID, or the U.S. service member has to go somewhere else and fight. That is not the truth, and it should not be put forward on this committee. It is one of the worst things that I hear over and over. Now, I don't want to diminish the work that USAID does or the people that go out there and do it. They do some yeoman work, some outstanding work in some terrible places across the globe. But my colleague, Mr. Sherman, he posed the question early on. He said, what do we say to the service member who comes home injured, saying that we could have prevented this by sending that food over or this over? We cannot allow that argument to continue. It is not true. It is a false argument. You say to that service member, thank you for your service. Thank you for knowing full well the hazards of your chosen profession. Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, our men and women who put on a uniform in defense of this country, they know exactly what it is they are signing up for. They know exactly the hazards and the risks that are posed to them by the jobs that they choose to go out there and do, and they are proud of the work that they ask to go out there and do on behalf of every citizen of the United States of America. And that is my biggest ask out of this hearing for anybody that's still watching online, that's still in their offices or back home, that didn't come here to the floor of this hearing room. Pay attention to that. Stop making that argument. Stop using our service members as an excuse to send the taxpayer of some U.S. working citizen over to some other country. It's not to say that there aren't good uses over there, but that can't be the excuse because it is a false narrative. Here's a true narrative. Every time we send $1 overseas somewhere else, we are taking $1 that could have otherwise been spent here in the United States of America. So let's ask this question. Either we are in an outbreak and a pandemic, or we are not. Either we are or we aren't. But if we are, is there a better time to take those dollars that would have gone somewhere else, not on U.S. soil, and keep them here on U.S. soil, helping American citizens, helping people in our cities, helping people in our towns, helping people in our areas that are affected? If not now, then when do we say, keep those dollars here in the United States of America? We don't need to look at this as though if we cut 35% from foreign funding this year, that's something that goes on in perpetuity forever, or whether it's 20% or 10% or whatever that cut might be. Now is an important time to keep dollars on U.S. soil. Probably hasn't been a more important time in my generation to keep those dollars here to help Americans, to help people in our communities. And the argument is that we have to send it over to somebody else, and then we're using our service members as this false narrative to say that's why it has to be done. I'll repeat my statement in the beginning. That is bullshit, and I yield back.
Mr. Connolly.
Thank you. I respect my friend from Florida's service. He talks about false narratives. He just presented one. The dollars going overseas are an opportunity cost because those are dollars not being invested in America. And that has been proved false for decades. Dollars going overseas through effective programs are investments for America. They're investments in laying the groundwork for trade and investment. They're laying the groundwork for the creation of many kinds of new jobs for Americans. They're investments for expanding our economy. And as we're learning in COVID-19, we do not live on an island all alone. We're part of humanity. When something happens over there, it can affect us over here. And globally, protects Americans. So I reject the narrative we've just been given, and I hope most Americans watching will too as well. Foreign assistance can be, when it's effective, a very inexpensive investment in all Americans' future. And it protects the world from all kinds of harm, cyber, physical, economic. Mr. Barsa, I didn't hear your answer other than a reassertion that aid is committed to equity and fairness. But Ms. Titus gave you a catalog of individuals in your agency who have spewed hateful statements about LGBT members, about those who adhere to the Islamic faith. You have one member on your staff from the Family Research Council that's been dubbed a hate group. Are those people's views representative of yours or of the current philosophy governing AID?
Congressman, I have to reiterate what I said before. While someone is working for me at USAID, regardless of hiring category, civil servant, foreign service officer, or political appointee, everyone is held to the same high legal, moral, and ethical standards that have always existed.
Mr. Barsa, that doesn't answer the question. That begs the question. These are people with a history. Are you comfortable with that history in hiring them, in having them on your payroll, in representing the United States of America?
I have systems in place to ensure that people who are representing the United States as USAID employees do live up to the high standards.
So if somebody came to you with an explicitly hate-filled, racist rant and a history of it, posting it, tweeting it, going on bots and spreading it, as long as they said, well, that was then, this is now, I will adhere to the standards of AID, from your point of view, that's a qualified employee. Or at least it's not a disqualified potential employee.
Throughout, the appointment of political appointees occurs as a conversation between the White House and whatever agency in place. So regarding the vetting and the placement of appointees, I would have to refer you to the White House. What I can assure you, once they are in as an employee of mine at USAID, we have certain standards that we uphold people to.
Well, I've been working with aid for over 40 years, and I have never seen it peopled with individuals who have those kinds of records. And I think it's a shameful moment for aid. And it's shameful if you're right that those come from, because they're political appointees from the White House. It's another blot on this White House. Let me ask real quickly. The proposal is you take a 50% hit. Given the pandemic we're involved in and its ramifications in refugee camps, its ramifications in aggravating the HIV/AIDS crisis that's expected to grow by 10% over the next 5 years, how in the world can you absorb a 50% cut and do your job in meeting those many, many crises around the world?
Thank you, Congressman. As you're aware, your colleagues are aware, the budget you see before you was certainly developed started this development, the process that got us here with this budget started long before the outbreak of the pandemic. So extremely grateful for the generosity of the United States Congress with supplemental bills. I understand there's another one being negotiated right now. But the budget you see before you was developed before the pandemic.
So will there be a revised budget presented to Congress in light of the pandemic and in light of an analysis of the impact of the pandemic on your obligations and your opportunities to respond?
So certainly my understanding is negotiations on a potential supplemental are taking place right now between OMB, the White House, and the appropriators. So certainly we're in close contact with OMB in terms of the challenges we're seeing here and now. And certainly one of the things I mentioned previously in the testimony, on my first day, I put an announcement to my staff that one of my biggest concerns was the secondary and tertiary effects of the pandemic. So I have stood up an analytical cell, we're calling the Over-the-Horizon Task Force, to look outside of silos, to look at things like insecurity, backsliding in democracy, holistically what the challenges are going to be before us, not just in 6 months, but in 6 years, on the out years. So the product of this analytical cell, this Over-the-Horizon Task Force, will go to inform conversations that we have with OMB, and the product of that task will be given to you and your colleagues to help inform your decisions so we can all be making data-driven decisions when it comes to allocation of SCAR.
When can we expect to see that? I know my time is up, Mr. Chairman.
The planning cell is due to be finished by the end of the fiscal year, so the end of September.
So we'll see a revised budget by the end of...
I'm not saying you see a revised budget. So the analytical cell, the Over-the-Horizon Task Force, which is looking at holistically at challenges, we should have that information to inform conversations about budget. That information should be available by the end of the fiscal year.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time is up. I would just say to you, as the Committee of Jurisdiction, that is the originator of the authorization for AID, I would hope that we could get a revised budget that is much more realistic in light of the pandemic. My time is up, and the Chairman's been gracious. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to add me to the list, as I stated earlier, I'm incredibly saddened that you will not be back with us. Of course, I don't know if I'll be back with us or not either. But regardless, you've been nothing but class to me, and I really appreciate it. And I still want to take you up on that offer of hanging out with you in New York City one day. Somebody said that that'd be like an episode of Seinfeld, me and you up there. So I kind of look forward to that. That'd be really cool. Thank you, sir, for being here. I'm really concerned about China and the Belt and Road Initiative. I guess I come from it from a little different angle. My father fought in the Pacific, fought the Japanese all the way across the Pacific, and then he went to China after the war a short while and fought the communists, and I learned at a very early age some of their goals and things that were maybe a little different than some of my buddies growing up did. And so I looked at them. I've always looked at China through, I guess, rose-colored glasses, or not rose-colored glasses, but you know what I mean. I just always very skeptical of anything they do, any initiatives. And I'm wondering if you could explain to me a little more how we are responding to their Belt and Road initiatives. And a more of a, I don't need the, I don't want all this technical garbage. I just want to know from the heart what you say that you all are doing.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, from the heart, I didn't have any family that fought in the Pacific World War II, but I had a mother who fled communism as a young girl, as a young lady. So I have a visceral mistrust for communist systems, and I know what they do and how they abuse their people. So, but coming in, so you go with the data. So it's not just a visceral mistrust of the Chinese. When you look at the data, what they're doing across the world with debt diplomacy, with these one-sided deals where, somebody said earlier, money talks, but they give the promise of money in the short term, but with these long-ended conditions which basically tie up countries so they lose their autonomy, lose their sovereignty. So one of the best things we can do is to provide alternatives to the Chinese development model. We truly have a development model which is premised on what's called a journey to self-reliance, where we help countries stand up on their own, to stand up and get up on their own feet. So what we're doing across the world, it differs. What we're doing in Latin America, showing, deals that the Chinese did in Jamaica, letting other people know. So our missions in the field have a key role in helping share information with countries who might be tempted to fall for Chinese lies. We also help with infrastructure development. Again, we mentioned our work with the DFC. We help find ways so we can invest in deep water ports and other infrastructure in ways that benefit countries. Again, the best thing we could do to counter China is to be more open and talk about what we do.
What is working specifically when you mention deep water ports? I note for the record that actually China is building the deep water port in Israel, which to me is alarming, but that's on another subject. But I would like to know what is working and what can we do more of that is working?
Well, I can give you more details and anecdotes either for the record or following up with you later on, but an example right now is what we've done in the Solomon Islands. We supported a critical infrastructure assessment by Solomon Island engineers. Bina Harbor in Malaysia province is one of the last undeveloped deep water ports in the South Pacific, where China has been angling for increased influence. USAID staff led the infrastructure scoping mission together with several agencies to assess the port and complementary infrastructure. And because of our efforts and our openness, ultimately the government turned away from the Chinese support. That is one example. Happy to follow up with you and your staff with more examples as well.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I believe I'm just about to run out of time, so I will yield back maybe to Mr. Castro. I'm not sure.
Well, Mr. Burchett, you said such nice things about me. You can have all the time you want.
Oh, okay. Well, if you bring me one of those New York pizzas. I actually drove through your area this past week. I've never been to New York, and it's not Knoxville, Tennessee. I'll tell you that.
Well, we want you to come back.
Yes, sir.
Please do.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator, for being here to testify. And some of these questions or part of the question may have been asked. I apologize. I was on the House floor. So as we speak about the meaning and significance of USAID global leadership during one of the greatest health crises the world has known, it's critical that USAID representatives carry out the true message and mission of USAID in a way that reflects U.S. values. However, a series of recent political appointments to USAID contradicts these values. At least 3 recent positions have been filled by personnel that have histories of Islamophobic, homophobic, and anti-immigrant comments. I speak specifically of Merritt Corrigan, Mark Kevin Lloyd, and Bethany Kozma. Some of these comments include, quote, America is a homo empire, unquote, ruled by the, quote, tyrannical LGBT agenda, unquote, and Islam a, quote, barbaric cult, and women should not hold office because they will, quote, always advocate for themselves at the expense of men and revel in it, unquote. So I know you didn't make these comments, but you are the administrator. And can you please explain to us today why these people remain in their leadership positions at USAID, and will you take action to replace them? And if not, please explain how USAID will mitigate the damaging message their representation imparts to partner countries and agencies and to USAID personnel who remain under the leadership of these people.
Congressman, as the acting administrator of USAID, it is my responsibility to ensure that each and every employee of USAID, regardless of hiring category, civil servant, foreign servant, or political appointee, lives up to the highest legal, moral, and ethical standards that USAID has always held in place. So I'm proud to say that the work of USAID overseas and here at headquarters remains unimpeded by this. So we're very proud of the way we're executing our work. And again, I can assure you and your colleagues that every employee is held accountable.
And I appreciate that. And I don't doubt your sincerity in wanting it to be a place that respects all people. But you have some folks in key positions who have made very bigoted comments. Have you had a conversation with them? Have you admonished them at a minimum? What action has been taken?
I'm not going to comment on personnel decisions, but I can assure you and your colleagues that we have the mechanisms in place for oversight and ensuring that every employee, regardless of hiring category, actually lives up to the standards that we have and have always had.
I just want to convey to you what a damaging message it sends around the world for USAID, which is a development organization, and it's supposed to help people in need, people of color, LGBTQ people, vulnerable people all around the world, to have folks like that in the employee of an agency, really any federal agency or government agency, but in the employee of what is our gem of reaching out to the world, USAID. Can you tell me what role Johnny McEntee and the Presidential Personnel Office, PPO, play in pushing these people as nominees? Did you or someone at USAID first recommend them, or were their names initially put forward by PPO?
Congressman, certainly in this administration and my previous service in the Bush administration, the placement of political appointees is, with all administrations, a conversation between the White House, obviously through the Office of Presidential Personnel primarily, and the host executive branch agency.
Okay. I yield back, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator, for being before our committee. Again, I also want to stress my displeasure, my objection to the presence of folks that have made anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ, Islamic-phobic statements in an agency that's really there to help other countries develop. And there should be an agency that recognizes diversity and allows for those diverse groups within the agency in our country and abroad to develop. And so I am concerned that these statements will hamper, if not break, the development of good programs in countries that need the help, particularly during this pandemic across the world. And I would like to see the administrator perhaps put out a statement that names these individuals and actually moves away from their statements in an unequivocal way to send a clear message that the agency and his leadership does not stand for what those folks had to say. At the very least, if not, look into their past and present practices and see whether those practices will impair the agency's ability to do the great work that they should be doing across the world. My question is regarding, I know that, Mr. Barsa, you have a vast experience in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we see how the pandemic is now spreading throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, Brazil, Mexico. We know that it hit early on Ecuador really hard, the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean and other island nations. And I want to know what's our plan with regards to the distribution of PPEs, ventilators, and other equipment, life-saving equipment to this country. We could whine and complain about China, but the fact of the matter is that they go in there and they take ownership of major projects. I know that we've attempted to do that, but we have not done it in a significant way in the region. Right in our backyard, we're being outflanked by China because they're coming in, maybe in a predatory way, which I disagree with, but they're coming in and taking out major projects and major infrastructure projects that are critical to the development of those countries. So I want to know, particularly now during this pandemic in the Caribbean and in Latin America, what's the plan for USAID to distribute PPEs, ventilators, other important equipment to help those nations? Mr. Barsa.
Thank you, Congressman. Certainly some of my time, my experience dealing with natural disasters at the Department of Homeland Security, one of the lessons it's ingrained in me, how disasters evolve over time. So a lot of the assumptions and decisions that are based in one period of time may be revisited as information changes. So we're seeing just that with this pandemic. So part of the benefit of us having our presence in this country's missions, we're able to work with the host countries in seeing what the needs are as it develops. So regarding PPE, right now we have a policy in place where our implementing partners are able to purchase PPE locally, but we're constantly assessing what the needs are in a particular country. The pandemic is hitting countries differently, so it wouldn't be prudent to come up with a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all to response to the pandemic. So our response in each country is tailored to the specific challenges. So be it.
Let me say, for example, Administrator, rapid test kits, which are needed everywhere because this is testing, tracing, treatment, the TTT. Rapid test kits, they're direly needed in many places across Latin America and the Caribbean. What are we doing to provide that to those countries?
There is a comprehensive view we have toward the pandemic, understanding that test kits are part of the response. They may not always be available, certainly in amounts we like, but again, in terms of the tailoring of our response, the response to the pandemic in Haiti is different from the response in Dominican Republic and different from the response in Colombia. So we look to see what assets are available and what is needed. We try to tailor a response in the best way possible to the country's specific needs.
Okay, let me just say that it's been very difficult for the Latin American and the Caribbean, and they're in dire need of test kits, of ventilators now, of course, of PPEs, and we're coming right into hurricane season. I want to know, Mr. Barsa, what preparations has USAID done to help Caribbean countries that are on the pathways of hurricanes and will be hit hard right in the middle of this pandemic during this hurricane season? Is there any preparation from USAID to assist these countries?
Again, Congressman, this is especially a great point of pride coming into USAID, especially from the Department of Homeland Security, where it's so involved with so many disaster responses with FEMA, coming in to find a professional team at USAID so adept, so talented in disaster response. But similarly to FEMA, our responses right now are modified based on the challenges of the pandemic. So we are closely coordinating with FEMA and coming up with best practices for hurricane response, particularly when it comes to putting people in shelters. How do you do that with safe distancing? How do you do that with PPE for the displaced personnel? So we're in constant communication with FEMA on sharing best practices on how to respond during the pandemic, but we are ready and we're braced for any hurricanes. Hopefully we won't have to, but we've seen certainly the reports that this may be a more active hurricane season than most, but we're prepared to the best way possible to respond.
Well, thank you.
I'm deeply concerned.
Excuse me?
I am deeply concerned about the hurricane season in the middle of the pandemic in that region.
We all are. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Finally, the statement, on the statement, will you put out a statement on the appointees and their anti-LGBTQ, anti-immigrant, and Islamophobic statements?
To ensure that there's no confusion, on June 24th, I put out a statement publicly. It's available on the website. I can give it to you and your staff, reiterating our values: excellence, integrity, respect, empowerment, inclusion, and commitment to learning. So I have reiterated.
Will you name the names?
I commit to you, without naming names, because again, all employees, regardless of hiring category, are held to the same high legal, moral, and ethical standards.
Okay, we're going to have to go on to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Espaillat. Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Acting Director Barsa, I first want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. We are facing challenging times, both as a country and challenging times across the globe. Also, want to thank you. You and I had the opportunity to visit by phone 2.5, 3 weeks ago to talk about some of our common and shared interests, and also to talk about some of the goals of USAID. Wanted to talk to you, and I wanted to highlight a program that the USAID has there, and that I'm proud to say is housed in the 3rd Congressional District at Mississippi State University. Mississippi State's Innovative Lab for Fish, and is part of your agency's Feed the Future program. Since September of 2018, and in partnership with other research universities, Mississippi State has the opportunity to manage that program and support USAID's aquaculture research and capacity building, and it has been implemented in 5 developing countries. We have seen that in Bangladesh, Cambodia, Kenya, Nigeria, and Zambia. And so this is a very important project, a very important program where your agency is able to partner with research universities so that we can continue to export across the globe the opportunities for countries to better themselves and actually to be able to feed their population. So first of all, I want to thank you for your support of that program. I want to thank Mississippi State University and my good friend Dr. Mark Keenum for partnering with USAID, and I want to thank Dr. Keenum for him being an advocate for global food security, as this program again will help feed more than 800 million people across the globe who suffer from hunger. But do want to ask you a question as it relates to, again, a topic that you and I had the opportunity to visit on a couple weeks ago, and that being the nation of Venezuela. I know in your written report there on page 7, you address on page 7 and then page 8, you talk about the administration's stand. You talk about how the administration is working with the people of Venezuela to recover their country and actually to change their future as they seek to throw off the chains of a dictatorship that they're currently suffering. And so I just wanted to ask you for just a couple minutes if you could expand before this committee about things that USAID is doing specifically in Venezuela as we seek to help the Venezuela people again retake their country and, as you said, retake their future.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Certainly, as I stated before, on the personal level, my mother having to flee communist Cuba at a young age and growing up with that certainly have a special place and sensitivity for the suffering of the Venezuelan people inside and outside of Venezuela. So I'm proud to be leading an organization that is doing so much to alleviate or attempting to alleviate human suffering within the borders of Venezuela and helping with those displaced Venezuelans and the host communities and countries that are hosting them. Certainly, to date, the United States has provided more than $856 million in humanitarian and development assistance to support programs inside of Venezuela with 17 neighboring countries. Our programs expand democratic spaces by supporting civil society organizations, independent media, human rights organizations, and the democratically elected National Assembly and Intergovernment of Juan Guaido. Certainly the suffering from the failed economic system of the regime led by Maduro, even before the pandemic, we were seeing and hearing reports of collapsing medical systems, of malnutrition, and other suffering inside the border of Venezuela. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, the situation has even gotten worse. Part of the tragedy before us is Maduro's regime blocking our ability and other countries' abilities to get much-needed humanitarian assistance inside the borders of Venezuela. It's extremely frustrating knowing that we could help alleviate human suffering, and the regime will not let us get in humanitarian assistance, certainly in the scale necessary.
Well, thank you, and I'm out of time. So, Mr. Chairman, at this point, I will yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barsa, I don't anticipate that we'll agree on everything, but I think there are a few things we can probably agree on. I'd like to move through them quickly. Can we agree that responding to COVID-19 required Congress to pass emergency stimulus packages in both houses to address the virus's spread in the United States?
I'm certainly grateful for the generosity of the United States Congress as a supplemental, and we've done our best to put that money to good use.
Can we also agree that we didn't have sufficient money appropriated in fiscal year 2020 to deal with this pandemic without those stimulus packages?
Well, we certainly, throughout the budget process, we couldn't anticipate something that hadn't occurred yet.
And can we agree that while we don't know when, there will probably be future pandemics?
Well, I guess it's a mathematical possibility, yes.
Can we agree that addressing future pandemics will require global cooperation?
We can agree on that, yes.
Great. Because eradicating a pandemic requires global cooperation, can you then, sitting here today as acting USAID administrator, commit to significant investments in global health and foreign aid in fiscal year 2021?
I can easily commit to that because that's what we've been doing for decades.
Okay, then you would object to the decision to pull U.S. funding for the World Health Organization, and you would also object to the President's fiscal year 21 budget, which cuts foreign aid by 21%, especially since you know that international health organizations make up a large percentage of that foreign aid?
I think this is where we part ways. No, and certainly the World Health Organization, the President's decision to withdraw from the World Health Organization was based on a number of factors, and certainly that is certainly the prerogative, and we certainly don't disagree with that decision. As I stated before, in terms of our investments in global health last year, only 4% of the money the United States spent on global health, only 4% went to the World Health Organization. And since that decision has been made, we've been actively looking to find alternative partners to continue the work we've been doing throughout the world.
So now we need to find alternative partners because we pulled out of the WHO. The fiscal 21 budget includes a 21% cut in foreign aid, but a 20% increase in modernizing our nuclear arsenal. How does that imbalance in the President's priorities reflect our desire for global cooperation to deal with future pandemics?
Ma'am, in my decades of service in government and outside of government, I've never met a government agency that said they had enough money. Certainly, these decisions on budgets are difficult ones that are Solomonic. You always have to have scant resources. So in terms of the allocations between different agencies, I'd have to direct you to ONB.
But you would agree, would you not, that the desire for global cooperation to deal with future pandemics is at odds with decreasing the budget for that kind of foreign aid?
I'm certainly cognizant that the decisions on the overall budget are difficult ones with scant resources, and nobody has everything they would like to have. So we stand by the budget before you. It is the end of this budget before you is the end product of a process that started long before the onset of the pandemic.
But we have to adjust to changing circumstances. Let me just ask you, do you have any idea what the COVID-19 pandemic has cost the American taxpayer?
No, I haven't seen. I don't have any of those figures for me.
Well, I would just ask that you heed the advice of President Bush's Deputy Assistant Administrator of USAID, Lester Munson, who said, prevention is far cheaper than an ex post cure. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. I recognize Ms. Wagner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the chairman, wherever he may be, for organizing this hearing, and I thank you, Administrator Barsa, for your time this afternoon and for your service to our country. We look forward to working with you to strengthen our international development programming, promote support for humanitarian aid, and maintain robust U.S. leadership abroad. Today, we are seeing rivals like China and Russia exploit instability and crisis to undermine democratic values and respect for human rights. The United States' insistence on collaboration and self-sufficiency makes us the partner of choice for countries seeking a helping hand to grow their economies, improve health systems, fight corruption, and so on. We must continue to play a leading role in helping marginalized, poor, and vulnerable people around the world build a better future. Administrator Barsa, the Chinese Communist Party continues to disseminate dangerously inaccurate and misleading information about COVID-19 and its origins. How is USAID supporting programs to correct CCP falsehoods and ensure that our partners are basing pandemic response efforts on accurate information?
Certainly, Congressman, thank you for your question. As part of your question, the premise of your question is these falsehoods are being perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. So one of the best tools we have is in this information is to counter with our own information, to expose the lies when we occur, to highlight instances of faulty PPE, faulty information. So communication is one of our best tools. What we have going for us is the honest assessment of what we do, our developmental model, the options that we have in terms of helping companies on their journey to self-reliance, to stand up on their own 2 feet. So we are doubling down on communications in the Indo-Pacific, Latin American, Caribbean, and everywhere we're seeing the Chinese try to exert their malevolent influence.
Thank you very much. When this global health request was developed, we were not in the middle of a global pandemic. How is USAID working to prevent backsliding in our existing global health programs, such as HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and maternal and child health?
Well, certainly the Chinese Communist Party's lack of transparency at the onset of the pandemic set us back. It made things more difficult for USAID. Again, thank you again to you and your colleagues for the generosity and the supplemental bills so far. When we first started our funding to respond to the pandemic, we initially targeted our efforts in the Indo-Pacific, Europe, and Africa, some places that had high transit routes with China, which was more likely to be the start of this virus that started within China. Because of the lack of transparency, we got there too late. So then we had to expand our work. So now we are globally. As was mentioned before, USAID has spent decades investing in global health infrastructure, access to clean water, strengthen epidemiological systems, a whole suite of activities. So we're proud of the fact that these investments have paid off in terms of better response. And it's lamentable that because of the Chinese, all of these systems are being challenged.
USAID is doing great work to advance the Indo-Pacific strategy, reassuring our allies and partners in the region. However, Southeast Asian countries on the front lines of escalating competition between the United States and China, I think, worry that a strategy focused on the Indo-Pacific will somehow diminish their role in regional affairs. How will USAID promote Southeast Asian countries' centrality in achieving a free and open Indo-Pacific?
Mr. Barsa, could you give a rapid response? Because I'm told we're expecting a vote on the floor very soon.
Very rapidly. We have a regional developmental mission in Asia, which is a regional hub for all activities in Southeast Asia. But the competition with China is certainly not limited to Southeast Asia. We're seeing, unfortunately, this competition worldwide. And happy to respond further with you with questions for the record.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Barsa. I appreciate your time today. I have to start by recounting our phone call on June 12th, which I did enjoy, and I also shared some of the concerns shared by many of my colleagues about a number of the hires made. And rather than go over that ground again, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up. But I want to focus my attention on the Local Works Program first. As you know, it looks to advance locally led development in countries all around the world. which means local people becoming empowered to take the lead in the development process, including priority setting and decision making, management, and a whole lot more. I love that program. I believe it holds up the administration's priority of achieving self-reliance. I just welcome a very quick synopsis of your thoughts on the program, Mr. Barsa.
I think the program is emblematic of exactly what we're trying to achieve. I mean, but self-reliance, to help private sectors in each country grow on their own, so to set the environment for the growth. I firmly believe that jobs aren't created by government, but they're created by the private sector. So having these programs in place to help private sector and economies grow exactly what's needed for long-term sustainable economic development.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as you, of course, know, the program gets its funding from the Development Assistance Fund and the Economic Support Fund. You're also probably aware the President's budget requests ask that those two accounts be combined into one account, the Economic Support and Development Fund. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I need to know, how can we ensure that such a valuable program on which we both agree is still fully funded and an important part of our development assistance when the core accounts that it funds are being collapsed into one and, unfortunately, significantly reduced? How can we reconcile that?
Again, as I mentioned, Congressman, in my time, in my decades of service inside and outside of government, I have never been in a government agency or known of a government agency that had enough money as they would certainly like. Certainly, these are challenging times, scarce resources, so we stand by the budget before you, but you have my commitment that I and the rest of the USAID team will be doing our best with these precious taxpayer dollars to further these programs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Levin. Okay, we move to Ms. Spanberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you very much to the witness for being here. It's good to see you virtually like this. Thank you very much for testifying. USAID global health programs have been monitoring zoonotic diseases, so the diseases that spill over from animals to people, for more than a decade. And these programs have collectively been known as the PREDICT program. They leverage the expertise of health officials to respond quickly to disease outbreaks and prevent future outbreaks. This life-saving work has helped identify hundreds of viruses and enhance the resilience of healthcare systems around the world. This administration decided to shutter PREDICT ahead of having a replacement ready to go. Personally, this does not make sense to me, given the proven effectiveness of this program, especially as experts have been warning for years about the very real threat of a pandemic. Now, I understand that there has been a short-term extension of the PREDICT program and a call for proposals for follow-on programs. That is the basis of my question today. What is the status of extending PREDICT and/or setting up a successor program?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. PREDICT was always planned on having a full life cycle and an end date. It is not that the PREDICT program is being shut prematurely. This is a natural evolution of the program, and our follow-on program, Stop Spillover, was always planned to—
Mr. Barsa, how can you say it's a full life cycle when we always have known that the future threats of pandemics existed? Why would the administration choose to end a program that so far had proven successful without a replacement ready? So what is that successor?
The successor is called Stop Spillover. It is building upon all the lessons learned from the PREDICT program and improving our ability to monitor zoonotic diseases. Instead of continuing something which may be outdated, again, we're learning from the PREDICT programming, and our follow-on program, which we hope to have an award by in September, just a few months from now, is building upon all the successes of the PREDICT program to have a more robust analytical—
What are the successes upon which Stop Spillover will be building upon?
I don't have the exact data before me, but happy to get back to you and your staff. Questions for the record or a separate briefing.
Thank you. And what are the weaknesses of the PREDICT program that would require a new generation program and request for proposals?
And again, happy to provide a briefing, more information to you, but it's not so much that there are weaknesses in the program, but just a natural evolution that you're going to have a follow-up program. But again, happy to get back to you with more details.
But Mr. Barsa, typically with an evolution is continuous. Here we've had a stoppage of a program that has been known to help our country and the world as it relates to the threat of zoonotic diseases and pandemics. And now we're in a process where we're receiving proposals for the next step in the middle of a pandemic. Do you understand the concern that many of us have, that the timing is just inappropriate and hurting our ability to respond?
I don't know if it's hurting our ability to respond. Again, our response, we can go back and have more detailed discussion after the hearing. But again, this is always planned. I mean, so we're no longer receiving proposals. That window closed on June 1st, and we're on the cusp of making an award and moving forward with the follow-on program.
But when a global pandemic struck, was there ever discussions that you were a part of or led or were aware of saying perhaps during a global pandemic where we're having massive closures, the U.S. economy is coming to a crushing end and we frankly need our public health expertise? Was there ever a discussion of maybe this is not the right time to pursue this shift?
Well, but again, certainly on looking at how zoonotic diseases spill over and get into the human population, that's on the front end. So certainly with the response to the pandemic, I mean, the response comes from, PPE, ventilators, access to clean water. So again, the PREDICT program was extended, and this is the natural follow-on to stop spillover. In terms of the response to the pandemic, of course, we've been absolutely focused on that.
Okay, well, certainly given the death rates across the United States, I hope that while we're in a position, we should focus on what has been working. We should focus on saving lives. And I continue to think that repeated attempts to cut public health programs, including those that catch diseases before they become the outbreaks in the pandemic, such as COVID-19 that has now killed thousands upon thousands of Americans. I really cannot help but wonder about the role that PREDICT could have played in the lead up to COVID-19 had it been able to halt the virus's ability to come to our country. And we are currently experiencing the costs of underinvesting in public health domestically and in coordination with our international partners. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you for being here, Mr. Barsa.
Thank you. The gentlewoman yields back. Let's go back to Mr. Phillips because I cut him off prematurely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barsa, we have been speaking about the Local Works program. I appreciate your support of it. I encourage incremental investment because I do think it is one of the most compelling programs that we offer. I also want to talk about kids, youth, and the House Appropriations Committee included my request in their recent report that would, quote, encourage the inclusive and meaningful participation of youth in peace building and conflict prevention, management, and resolution, as well as post-conflict relief and recovery efforts. We can all celebrate the fact that kids, youth are the majority population in many conflict-affected countries. So my question to you, Mr. Barsa, is how will the administration, how will you prioritize the role of youth in conflict prevention, resolution, and recovery? Because I do believe they have a unique role to play. I love your comments on that.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think the old saying holds true: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So investments in education and making sure youth have access to education not just helps with economic integration and a country's economic development, but also in societal and political integration as well. And this is especially true when women, by the way, we're always pushing for that. So as part of our reorganization, we recently stood up the Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization to do just that, to put a focus to our efforts on investments to prevent conflict on the front end. So just like all the other things we've mentioned that are affected by the pandemic, I'm also concerned about the challenges in education systems throughout the world and people not having access to education. So we are very attuned to the challenges, and we're looking at our programming to see what we can do in any number of countries to ensure that youth do have access to education, because the consequences of youth in different countries not getting a full education are certainly negative, and we'd like to avoid that.
I appreciate it. I also want to talk about the GFA, the Global Fragility Act. This week, I passed an amendment into the NDAA that will expand upon the GFA to require that USAID ensures that the State Department's atrocity prevention framework is incorporated into the country development cooperation strategy in countries at risk of mass atrocities. So my question to you, Mr. Barsa, is does USAID have sufficient staffing with the right skills and training to successfully implement the GFA? And if not, what do you need?
Congressman, first of all, I want to thank you and your colleagues for your prescience in working on the Global Fragility Act. Certainly, again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So in these fragile societies, what the Global Fragility Act is done, what you did is you put a focus. So there's so many activities that USAID has involved with over the decades which go to support the concept and challenges of fragility. In terms of the actual implementation of the Act, as you know, certainly the Act has tasked not just USAID, but other elements of the interagency. So we're currently in discussions on the technical details of the implementation of the Global Fragility Act, and once those discussions are done, I look forward to following up with you and your staff on the technical details of how we are going to implement the Global Fragility Act. But basically what we're doing is we are focusing many long-standing USAID activities to rise to the challenge of fragility.
Thank you.
All right.
We move on to...
Thank you, Mr. Barsa. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields. Ms. Houlihan.
Today. It was a pleasure to talk to you on the phone recently as well, and my questions will basically surround the same conversation that we had on the phone. I will take you up on your word that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And when we're talking specifically about the UNFPA, United UN Population Fund, there was $32.5 million that were appropriated for the agency that I understand now will be transferred over to the International Organizations Bureau to USAID. And while I think it's absolutely clear that no one can replace the work of UNFPA in places like Yemen and Venezuela and even in New York City, I want to make sure that we're going to continue to support the programs with the same mission that the funds were originally intended for. So I haven't yet seen where fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020 monies appropriated for UNFPA will be reprogrammed. To where has the funding been relocated, and specifically what programming is being supported, sir?
So in terms of the details of how every dollar that was reprogrammed went to, I don't have that information before me, but happy to get back to you on questions for the record or a separate briefing for you and your staff.
I would really appreciate that, and I'd also like to know, has the full scope and scale of the previous UNFPA activities continued with any new partners that you're aware of? Specifically, do the beneficiaries support the UNFPA mission and what was originally intended, the essence of the intent of that money?
Again, ma'am, to get to that level of granularity, I'm afraid I have to give you a separate briefing or question for the record, but I'm absolutely happy to do so.
And I would very much appreciate that, too. What I'd also like to know here in this audience is, can you assure us that any transferred funds that will be going to our existing international family planning will be going to international family planning and evidence-based reproductive health programs that support access to contraceptives, ending maternal death, ending child marriage, gender-based violence, and female genitalia mutilation?
Absolutely, yes.
So you can guarantee us that will be the case, that those monies will go towards that? That's excellent, and thank you for that assurance, because I would definitely like to emphasize that there are many organizations out there. Of course, UNFPA is an irreplaceable partner, but we really need to make sure that we are clearly directing those resources towards their original intent. And thanks for that, and I'd love to follow up with you on a subsequent conversation about that. My next question has to do with access to comprehensive health services, and I think that we can both agree that gender-based violence is a critical impediment to personal safety, to the economic empowerment, and to the long-term well-being of women globally. Is that something we can agree on?
Of course, yes.
In 2016, the global cost of violence against women was estimated to be $1.5 trillion, or basically 2% of the global GDP, or roughly the size of the Canadian economy. It is sometimes referred to as the shadow pandemic. So clearly, Congress has made addressing GBV globally a priority by appropriating at least $150 million annually. The administration did not request any specific funding for this issue. Can you explain to me why not?
Certainly, our efforts to address gender-based violence, USAID efforts, have reached approximately 8 million people in FY 2019. 62 USAID operating units reported activities to provide critical support and care to prevent and respond to gender-based violence and child early and forced marriages. We know in conflict settings, and right now we're especially concerned in this COVID-affected world, that there's a potential rise in gender-based violence. So as part of all of our programs, all of our missions, being on the lookout, looking for ways to prevent gender-based violence is part of our programming.
So why hasn't the administration specifically carved out that in their resources and what they've asked for?
And again, as you mentioned before, the budget you see before you is a product of trade-offs and difficult decisions in terms of resource allocations.
So I understand that budgets are a process of trade-offs, but they're also a reflection of our values. And it seems to me not only should our values be in combating gender-based violence, but the economics of it would compel us to be putting resources towards that, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I appreciate your time, and I look forward to follow-up conversations with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Barsa. Would you agree that when an effective vaccine or vaccines for COVID-19 are developed, that it will be in the U.S. national interest for everybody in the world to have access to that vaccine, or at least in every affected country?
Well, certainly pandemics know no borders, so certainly it would be beneficial to have a wide distribution of a vaccine, of course.
Okay. Beneficial to us, not just from a humanitarian point of view.
Vaccines respect pandemics respect no borders.
Okay. And so should the United States do our share with our allies and partners to ensure that everybody who needs a vaccine gets one, given that many of the affected countries are developing countries that may not be able to do it on their own?
Well, again, as mentioned before, we're certainly proud of the work we've done with vaccines for any number of diseases.
I'm not asking what we've done. Should the United States play its role with our partners, with our allies, our fair share in ensuring that a vaccine is distributed to everybody who needs one?
I believe we should, yes.
Okay. What have we pledged thus far to that global effort? I mean, as you know, a number of our allies and partners have made specific pledges to aid in the distribution and development of a vaccine.
I don't have any fixed pledges to report to you today, but we are concerned. We're waiting certainly the production of a vaccine, and we'll certainly.
So the answer is nothing. We've pledged nothing.
I have nothing to.
Well, you would know if we had pledged something,
no,
presumably.
Yeah.
So the answer is nothing. Yeah. I think Canada has pledged about $800 million. I think Norway's pledged, if I recall correctly, $1 billion. You were asked about U.S. attendance at conferences, and you said we have other ways of coordinating with our allies, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, as we were discussing, money talks, and so far we have not made such a pledge. This is something I think we are committed to on a bipartisan basis here. As you know, the Senate is now working up their answer to our opening bid on the next coronavirus relief package. I've spoken to a number of Republican senators about this, and my understanding from press reporting is that the Republican proposal in the Senate put forward a very generous number for U.S. contributions to eventual distribution of a global vaccine, but that the White House is pushing back on this. So again, I want to press you, what is the administration policy? Does the administration believe that we should do our share as a large and wealthy country to fund the distribution of a global vaccine.
I'm afraid I can't opine on negotiations between the White House OMB and the appropriators.
But you know what the U.S. policy is, the administration policy.
So I know that the United States people, the United States government has been, we are the most generous people in the history of the world, and our investments in global health infrastructure are unprecedented. And
I know, but that's a talking point, and what we're
it's also reality.
I understand. Look, I've sat where you sit, sir, and I've been through the murder boards and read the briefing books, and I know there's all kinds of ways they teach you how not to answer the question. But what we need here is a clear commitment from the administration. You have it from Democrats, you have it from Republicans, including strong supporters of President Trump on Capitol Hill. We want to do our share. And right now, my sense is that we are getting resistance, not from USAID, but from the White House to ensuring that we do that share. When a vaccine is developed, that is a critical moment. And there will be a tendency by some to say, let's keep it. Let's not give it to anybody else. We did it. We developed it. We invented it. You know that sentiment is out there. So I want to hear, and if I can't hear it from you, I hope you go back and urge the Secretary and others to be very clear about this. The United States will do its share.
It's not a talking point, but it is a sincere belief, it is a sincere statement of fact that I am proud, and the men and women and the investments USAID has made in global health infrastructure, our ability to respond to
has made, past tense. We're
and
interested
we're
in
still
what
responding.
happens next.
Our generosity is ongoing and continuing.
Okay, and we've pledged nothing. Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, Mr. Trone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing today. Mr. Barsa, we've all seen reports of authoritarian leaders taking advantage of the pandemic to increase their crackdowns on free speech and independent press. This is why outlets like Radio Free Europe are so critical. But the Trump administration has slashed the budget for the Agency for Global Media. This undermines our efforts to help our allies and our own self-interest and slow the spread of these far-right anti-democratic ideologies that threaten our basic freedoms. How are you going to continue to support these independent media in countries like Hungary, Poland, Turkey, if you're deprioritizing tools that have proven to be effective for decades?
Well, certainly, one of the things I'm very proud of in USAID is our efforts on countering malign Kremlin influence, for example, which basically rests on 4 pillars. It's a focus on democracy and rule of law, independent media, energy independence, and economic diversification. Through our efforts, we have been able to turn the tide on Russian disinformation, for example. For example, in Georgia, in April, Facebook credited USAID's local implementing partner for the removal of over 500 pages, 100 Facebook accounts, and 120 groups which were created maliciously by the Kremlin to sow false narratives. In Serbia, we build partners' skills in fact-checking and debunking false narratives to expose Kremlin information. And I can keep going on with other examples. So we're very proud of our efforts to bring light to efforts not just by the Kremlin, but by the Chinese Communist Party as well.
But if we don't use things like Radio Free Europe, we can't get out the true facts, and we don't have to spend all of our time debunking the bad facts. Let's talk a second about highlighting the importance of countering malign Kremlin influences throughout Europe and Eurasia. Yet your budget request seriously reduces the capacity building and anti-corruption programs. So how is USAID going to counter these Russian malign influences, and how will programming be impacted if these reductions are all enacted?
Certainly, Congressman has stated before that the budget you see before you is the product of a long process of difficult decisions about how to allocate scarce resources. So certainly our work in fighting corruption not just in Europe, but throughout the world, remains a critical part of all of our programming.
Syria, Iraq, enormous amount of destruction, infrastructure, population displacement. The Trump administration is trying to encourage increased foreign governments to put investment in these areas to help them recover. But the question is, will the U.S. continue to invest more? And what foreign donors have actually stepped up and been forthcoming?
In terms of actual dollar figures by other donors, I have to get back with you. The questions for the record or later on to brief you as to who's contributed what. But certainly, just most recently on June 30th, Ambassador Jeffrey, the Special Representative for Syria, announced nearly $700 million in U.S. government humanitarian funding. And certainly this includes $368 million in USAID funding for food and non-food aid inside Syria to meet the needs of the regions. But in terms of actual dollar amounts contributed by other partners, I'll have to get back with you and your staff later on for that, with that information.
What other partners have contributed? Forget the dollar amounts.
I'm sorry, so you broke up. Could you repeat the question?
Name what other partners have contributed and skip the dollar amounts.
I'd have to get back with you. I think I know the answer here, but I don't have this in front of me. I certainly don't want to give you incorrect information, but I would like to follow up with you on that one.
That would be great. And what risks do you see of underinvesting? What's going to happen if we don't get this right?
Well, the short answer is human suffering is going to continue. So that's why we are so desirous in Syria and certainly inside Venezuela. When we see human suffering, we certainly hope for our ability to get humanitarian assistance into needy populations in a free equitable manner. So that's why we value every taxpayer dollar appropriated to us, and we want to ensure that it's spent wisely, getting to the people in need. And we're proud to say we have those structures in place to do just that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Barsa. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. As you can hear, there is a vote going on the floor. We want to thank all the members for their questions. Mr. Barsa, thank you for being here today. And the Committee on Foreign Affairs stays adjourned.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks.
Thanks. Somebody the IDF letter. Oh, yes.